And we're back.
Maybe?
Charger. Hello and welcome to Triangle Square, the PlayStation podcast. I'm your host, Brett Beck, and grabbing my laptop for me like the nice person he is...
Saul, bringing you guys technically episode 148, but this is 147.
Yeah, so as many of you probably know, definitely from our social media, that we chose to do last week, for whatever reason, we were just destined not to have an episode. I'm truly not sure as to why, but I had electrical problems Sunday when we originally were supposed to be recording, so that didn't end up happening, though we did get the electrical problems fixed. And then when we recorded the next day, we had our audio go to hell, and that's normally okay. We've set up for that with a backup, but our backup audio also had an error that came into effect about 20 seconds into the episode's recording. So it was the perfect storm of issues. We're changing up our setup so that we can hopefully see these things happen in front of our faces, or at least in a way that we can quickly reference without having to be distracted. And with that said, we're going to get on and hopefully have a good week and get back to the show. First thing I want to do is just mention how grateful I am that how nice many of you were. Not a single person really besides Josh Drago and his trying to be funny. What do you call it? Hazing. That's probably the word I'd use.
Yeah.
But outside of that, we got some genuinely great remarks of people just, wishing us luck on getting back and how much they enjoy the show and how it's a bummer they won't have one this week, but they're ready for us to come back. And that was very nice to see. So I appreciate you guys, and we are hopefully back. I really can't imagine that there's going to be an issue with this episode. But even if I have to sacrifice my name as Mayo to the pagan gods, I will do so. To make sure this episode goes through.
It's a quick 1 hour platinum.
Yeah, a quick 1 hour platinum.
Not even 1 hour, really.
I imagine that if you really just set a Vita down and just tap the screen like crazy, which, I guess it's the same with a DualShock 4 at that point. You're just tapping a button like crazy.
I was watching a Kind of Funny podcast when I did it, and I was just pressing X, I think.
There you go. You've done it. Best dollar you ever spent.
Probably would kill the pixel on that Vita screen I had.
It was sacrilege. It said, "This is what you used me for? You don't even look at me." Yeah,
it's
who
terrible.
knows? Anyway, we are Triangle Square, the PlayStation podcast, so if this is your first time seeing us for some odd reason, then of course you can find us in video format over on YouTube, where you can watch our lovely mugs, and if you're watching right now, you may notice that our center set piece that has our logo is gone. It's messed up as well. It was part of the craziness of last week, and I don't know what was going on, but we plan on getting that fixed and getting another one in. And if you want to listen to our smooth, sultry, somewhat lispy voices, at least on my side, then you can go over to Google Play Music, iTunes, Podbean, where they have an app where you can actually comment and speak with us on there if you don't like to have social media. And normally our social media is where we go through and ask our community's take question, which we pose at the end of every episode, and then repose it to essentially all of our social media so that everybody can respond to it, and then we can kind of discuss the community's feedback of any given question at the beginning of the next episode before we get into the rest of the episode. Because of what happened last week, I debated Wednesday just doing a community take anyway, but I decided I just didn't want to give into that week and just come back, have a fresh episode. So there will not be a community's take that we are answering from the previous episode, since the previous episode technically doesn't exist. And we're just going to go through and clean slate it. There would be a new question asked, and we'll get back onto that next episode. But again, thank you all for your patience, and we're going to get into this the right way, and that is always very simple, very warming. Saul, how have you been besides sick, and what have you been playing, if anything?
I had an STI. But
just to clarify, he did not have an STI. That was in his haze of being I'm not going to say medicated. In his haze of just not feeling good and being somewhat blank-minded, he accidentally said that.
I'm always blank-minded. See, I just said blank-minded. Speaking of which, Blake, let me know if you saw the PS4, because I haven't started it. I downloaded it before I came over here. I doubt I'll get to play any tonight. But you know how I was talking about a multiplayer game that we could all play together that would have assigned roles and stuff, and it'd be fun.
Mm-hmm.
I found the game. It's Red Dead Online. Weirdly enough, you can have bounties, you could have a fisher, a hunter, you can have all kinds of things. And I was actually looking at how well it played, and and the general reception, and if it was still populated, even though you don't have to play like that, you can play in a private game. Turns out like Red Dead Online is a lot better than GTA Online, where the story aspect of it is actually pretty good of a story. And so I'm gonna try that out tonight.
So I actually didn't know that. Just to make sure I'm following you correctly, there is a story component to the online.
Yeah, like I watched like the first the first little bit of creating your character and stuff, which is a lot more in depth than what GTA was. But yeah, it's like you're a prison and they break you out, and the person who breaks you out is a woman, and she's trying to find the person who murdered, or she knows who murdered her husband and made her a widow. And there's like 5 people that I guess you're gonna eventually hunt down and kill. And then you're it's all about, similar to the story of the game, it's all about getting a base, a camp started and stuff like that. But what I really, really enjoyed about Red Dead 2, even though I didn't finish the story, was the world of it is amazing. The environment of the game is amazing. The characters are kind of cool. You can do so many different things like you can in a Rockstar game. And so I'm just going to try that out. But for what I've actually played, is I downloaded, I said this last time, but it didn't make it to the air. But I tried Days Gone again, and I had 2 crashes, which is not super bad. Like within maybe 6 hours over the course of this past week that I've played it.
I think there's a real question brewing here. From your disk drive to your crashiness.
I think it's my PlayStation 4, but I'm not buying a new one.
Oh, I'm not saying you should. I'm just saying that at this point, I think we've kind of got to stop blaming the games, because it seems like there's a common denominator.
I wasn't going to blame the game. The only game
I'm not saying you were either. It's just for people who've been listening to the show for a long time. I used to agree whenever you'd say you had these problems, like, hey, blame the game. Even if I didn't have the problem, blame the game, because I may be the outlier. But as we're slowly learning, your PlayStation is the outlier.
What's weird is I played Dark Souls 1 yesterday for a little while, and I don't have crashes in that game. I didn't have crashes in Madden whenever I was playing that. I didn't have crashes in a good few games. Really, realistically, lately, it was Jedi Fallen Order, Days Gone, and I'm sure that there is another game that has caused crashes.
And I'm sure what you're getting at least some extent, is that these are games that had histories of bug problems and crashes.
Days Gone? I mean, not Days Gone. Jedi Fallen Order really didn't have a huge history of what happened to me.
No. But I mean, but what I just mean by in general is that there were a pervasive number of bugs that people were experiencing. So a crash and not pulling your save data just kind of seems par for the course and in line with that happening.
Well, and I wonder if there's something that is common amongst the PS4s that it keeps happening to. Because it's weird, like, for you not have an issue, but for me to have an issue. But that issue is not by itself. There's thousands of other people that have these issues.
And I know this sounds weird, but I actually start to think, you're on a PS4 Pro, just like I am. So if I start to kind of process of elimination down the differences that me and you have, I think that one of the biggest things is that regardless of what mode you are playing in, you're always playing in 1080p. So I think what may be happening is that the error may be somewhere in the line of how the game is supposed to recognize your TV and then look at it and then super sample down to 1080p. What you may be having problems with, and why I'm not, is that I'm playing on a native 4K resolution. The game is not native 4K, but I'm playing at a native resolution that's not meant to be super sampled down.
That might be a thing too for me, is that we're gonna redo my game room here in this week sometime, and that may change because I'm getting a 4K TV, or I have a 4K TV I'm putting in there.
And not that it'd be worth a lot, but you bought both Days Gone and Star Wars digitally, correct?
Digitally, and both on release day, actually. No, we're not Jedi Fallen Order. I didn't.
Yeah.
But
okay.
Days Gone I did.
From there, what I think you should do just to test the theory out is, since both of those games are known quantities of issues on your system, see how they react when you're playing them on a Pro without super sampling, and then see if it's either a problem in the game's handling of super sampling, or if it's something in your console that when it comes to super sampling is giving you issues.
I'd be interested, because those are both games like, well, I say they were both games that I want to go back to eventually. Days Gone was really, really fun, and I really do want to say 5 to 6 hours that I played it over the week. But the story still doesn't grip me as much as it's supposed to, but I actually liked that aspect about the game.
And it won't until later.
Well, even then I didn't like what was going on with like Boomer and stuff. I really didn't care. But I actually liked that, because it kind of was like, okay, I don't have to worry about paying attention to this kind of very deep story of any kind For now, I was going around with just an oil filter on my pistol, killing zombies silence, and it was really fun.
And I think part of the greatness of that game, in terms of the way that I think it builds, is that when you're playing it from the beginning, the pacing from a story perspective seems a little odd, because you're right. You're kind of like, well, I'm not quite invested. But the upside of that is it lets you get to grips with the game's mechanics really well before it actually starts bringing in the story stuff that would really make you care.
I will say
as it starts to grow on you, and I say this as somebody who I also did not immediately care about the stuff going on with Boomer, because they didn't set it up, but they set it up eventually. Boozer, not Boomer.
Oh, it is Boozer.
But you said Boomer, so I was just following
Boomer.
you. But whenever it goes through, I think the game does a good job of eventually making you care about Boozer. In a time where you feel like you've not mastered, but it's very similar to Horizon, but I think even to a better extent, where the game is constantly introducing new mechanical items that do different things and control the hordes in different ways, even in the late game, which just feels good when a game does not play its entire hand in the first third or the first half. Instead, even going up to the last quarter of the game, you're kind of getting something new.
Yeah, well, I like in these kind of games, not to say The Last of Us did it any like worse or anything, but like I actually prefer the way that Days Gone is telling the story compared to The Last of Us, where it didn't shovel tons of information to me at once. I actually enjoyed kind of being able to take a break and not have to worry about what is going on in the story, remembering characters. The story so far is very linear, and Last of Us was too, but it was also way kind of more deep to handle, and also
because you couldn't go off and explore.
Yeah, you couldn't.
This game gives you the ability to go off and be like, "Hey, I want to break off for a minute."
It's very similar to Horizon, and I actually think that it's almost what I think of. Exactly, my opinion on Horizon was that the story left a lot to be desired, but the gameplay was the best part, and the free roaming was the best part.
And I'm still curious, and I'm not saying you're wrong but I'm curious to see what your sentiment on the story is after you actually beat it.
Yeah, and I will probably go back to it with this 4K TV to test that theory out. One crash, though, actually scared the crap out of me, because it was one of those that you go to the trunk and you loot the trunk and a zombie pops out and hoes you. And it crashed. It crashed as that happened. Like it actually... I opened the trunk up and the zombie sprang on me, which gave me a startle there. But then as the zombie was making a sound, that's when the crash happened. And then just the blue screen popping up scared me as well, too.
I know this sounds weird, but doesn't that sound like, Kojima's talking about his next game potentially being a horror game?
Yes, it needs to be.
Doesn't that kind of sound like something Kojima do, where it would be a jump scare, and then on top of the jump scare, as soon as it's happening, you get the added scare of the unexpectedness of the sudden blue screen?
He did that.
But on...
PT did that.
I thought,
PT had an error screen in it.
Yeah, you're right, but it wasn't the common PlayStation.
It wasn't
one,
I don't know.
But it was just within the game. It would be more cool if he could find a way to completely mimic the PlayStations, or if it ends up being a multi-platform game, all the systems.
Yeah.
To where it's like you legit think that you've gone back. It'd be even crazier if not only does it crash, but inside of the game it crashes and then the system reboots within the game, and it's the exact PlayStation startup sequence, and then the exact UI.
Doki Doki Literature Club did something similar to that too. Where
I never played that, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I actually won't spoil it in case anybody wants to play a game. I highly suggest everybody to play it. I don't think it's on consoles. I think it's only on PC, just due to the nature
Pretty sure you're right.
What you have to do. But other than that, though, this week I've been on my Slay the Spire marathon a little less. I've only played it like twice this week. But yeah, I didn't really have a whole lot of time this week for games anyways. So the amount of time that I did get to put into Days Gone was Monday. I believe I played it some Sunday too, and then like Thursday. And I played a little bit of Dark Souls Remastered yesterday. I was talking to Corey in our Discord about something that I thought would be fun. Instead of doing like a stream or a let's play, what I was thinking about doing is, how you can natively stream on the PS4. And I thought about one night just natively streaming a full play of something, and anybody who wants to join just hop in a party and we all hang out. That way, instead of having to worry about a Twitch chat to read or anything like that, we're all talking, and I think that would be kind of fun for like a hangout night, like
Sure.
once a month, where we get together and do that. Not to replace a Saw Plays or streamer or anything like that, but as a supplemental thing. It's so much easier just to go home and hop in a party with friends and play a game and stream it at the same time than it is to set up Twitch and all that stuff. And then
I think we'll have to kind of look into what we want to do there, but I think it's a fun idea. Now, it'd get real crazy is if you and it'd make a game a little easy, but have it to where the first number of people that come in to fill the number of spots that you can get for summons, everybody come in and just play the game all in, together.
Oh, I didn't mean like multiplayer.
Oh, I
wise.
know.
Okay.
But I was just saying that would be an interesting addition, even if it was just one night of that. Because games like that, and maybe not that game, but maybe find another game that you can kind of do that on, where it's everybody coming in, the first people that come in, first come, first serve, essentially, and bring everybody in, and then it's something where it's all multiplayer.
Well, we were really good with having community plays, in a sense, for a while there. Like, it was pretty much me, you, Ryan, and John all hopping on, playing weekly, multiple times a week, too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I've been wanting to find a game. I know for sure Ryan, which is why I said he's going to be interested in Red Dead Online, because I know he still plays it. So, Ryan, if you are listening, hit us up on Twitter or send me a message on PlayStation or something, and we can eventually play Red Dead Online together. I think John plays with him, too. They have like this little saga he does, like a little mini story called The Jones Boys that he posts on Twitter. And I don't know if that's John with him or who else. But what have you been playing?
Mine has been a little sporadic. So since we've last been in an episode, if you follow us on social media, you've already seen it. But I've gotten the platinum for The Stick of Truth. Restarted it, downloaded it, played it, which I was talking about in the last episode that actually went up and everybody listened to. Went from there and started playing A Way Out, and I played that with one of the friends of the shows and listeners, Mr. Matt, and Matt Hunt, if I'm remembering correctly. And if what we're doing there is, I mentioned it last episode that didn't go up, and I think it's part of what Saul was talking about with Red Dead Online is the idea of playing a game where everybody can kind of co-op together, and then that was tied into our long-term wishes of No Man's Sky eventually doing something a little bit more pointed in a way that people can come together and do stuff. But either way, A Way Out has been very good. I've been really surprised by not only the quality of the game in terms of the way it looks for the budget it had and the ability to play it with others and whatnot, but I actually think that the way that it interweaves co-op has been very cool so far. So the majority of the game has existed in this thing of where you essentially are playing the game, and normally you see each other's screens.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I mean by that is not that you see the other person's screen, they see yours only. It's that both people see both sides of the screen, and so you can independently see what your partner is doing and what you are doing, so that even if you aren't walking in the same area, you have an understanding of what you need to do. And the game does that on purpose because it lets you kind of understand and see and have a frame of reference for the other person without having to look for just necessarily markers. And you can use that in terms of figuring out noises. Anyway, figuring out what you need to do to best co-op with each other. So they use it to great extent of having somebody know that you're about to walk by where they can see you, and they talk to a guard to make them turn around so you can sneak by. Mm-hmm. Parts of the game where you're running from the cops in a section, and I really love this. This is one of the times where instead of it doing where everybody sees both each other's cutscenes, or not cutscenes, but playthroughs, instead what happens is the game is doing this thing where you're both running, but you're not together.
Right.
Because you get separated. So then what happens is the camera will focus on one player, and the player who controls that character will go ahead and keep going. But then you'll get to a part, and then like the camera, without cutting, will travel through like an air vent and come up into a different floor, and then I'm gaining control because it's picking up where I'm at. And then I go through some stuff, go down, and then you see a TV, and the camera just zooms in on the TV where you see the other character running through, and then suddenly it takes away the film grain, and it's back to that character. So it's like
that's kind of
seamlessly moving between each other, flowing, and like sometimes for 10-second intervals, sometimes for 20-second intervals, whatever. And it was just really cool. I like the idea of the game, and it's got one of the more interesting things you don't see in a lot of games. It's got a platinum in a very story-driven game that has nothing to do with the story. Most of the time, a game, you can expect at least half of the trophies to be involved in, definitely with this type of game, to be involved with just getting through each section of the game. Yeah. And it's a game that's set up in kind of chapters anyway. But instead of having it be a platinum that you get specifically for doing each chapter of the game, every one of them is things that are completely optional within any given chapter that you have to kind of seek out and do. And that's how you get the trophy. And a lot of them are hidden. They require a lot of weird setup and stuff that you may not see. It kind of makes you. It's fun. One of the things we talk about with Zelda, Breath of the Wild, and why we think people kind of hopped on it was because it gave a sense of freedom that most games don't give.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I'm sure that there's things where the developers saw it happen and they're like, I technically never thought about that combination existing, but it does. Like people being able to freeze a rock, get behind it, swing it, and then catapult it, and then jump on it to be able to fly all the way across the map.
Yeah.
It's weird stuff like that. But
Metal
what
Gear
this
Solid 5.
Yeah, and what I like about that though is it's forcing you to rethink the way you normally think about games. A lot of the AAA games these days, and that's part of what made Bethesda, I think, compelling for a while, was the touch and interact with everything, even if it made it buggy. But most games teach you well, these are the only things you can interact with, these are the only things you can do. Whereas this game, you run by, there's literally a trophy for letting a bird out of a cage when while you're at the prison, while you're escaping. You happen to just go by a bird cage, and if you don't think about it, you'd never think I can interact with that bird cage, but you can. You walk over to it, you hit square, the bird will go out. Fly away, you get a trophy for it. And I like that. It's a way to make you stop and go, hey, you know what? If you are a trophy hunter, and this has been, I think, true for me and Matt, just from playing together, I know his sentiment. It's been kind of nice because instead of trying to rush through the game, we went into it thinking, hey, worst case scenario, we get a platinum on a pretty all right game.
Right.
Best case scenario, we get a platinum and a great game experience. So it kind of ended up being this thing of, now that we kind of started realizing that, like he let the bird out and it kind of surprised us, and then a trophy popped. We didn't even look at the trophy list. And it was like, oh, wow, that was a trophy. And so now with each chapter of the game, we go through it with this idea of, let's explore. Let's see what the game will let us interact with before we just choose to move on with what the story demands of us. And I've really enjoyed that. But outside of that, let's see. I think that is it. I played a little bit more Blasphemous, but not enough to say anything. I've done a lot of other stuff this week in a good way. But, I don't know. I guess games frustrated me a little bit this week, so I didn't play them so much.
Yeah.
I pretty much just played when we scheduled with Matt to do a Way Out. So I've really enjoyed that. And with it being on EA Access, I think it's a great game to get for $5 a month, and you get some other cool games in there like a Sea of Solitude, which I intend to start soon as well. So, with all these delays going on, it's kind of feels good to have something I'm occupied with.
Yeah.
I haven't started it, but I did buy Call of Cthulhu. I was already interested in it, but I just really didn't want to pay full price because I just was a little iffy from some of the reviews I read, but it was on sale this week for $10.
That's not bad.
When it's normally $40. So I said, yes, I will absolutely do that. So we'll see. Next week, I'll probably will have played some of that, and we'll see what ends up happening with it. But real quick, since we don't have a community's take, I need. I'm gonna do this smoothly. Anyway, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go into news, and I will have a small
what?
break where I get up and get a tea from my lovely wife because I'm very thirsty and I didn't get one. Anyway, going into the news, first things up here. Following a week of delays prior, like we just talked about, Dying Light 2 joins the lot with Techland delaying it for an indefinite amount of time from its original spring 2020 release window. Funnily enough, the developer just released a performance patch for the original game, Dying Light 1, that improves frame rate, drop issues, and makes for an overall more stable experience. A while back, they had mentioned that they were going to have another so many months of DLC on a game that was already aged, and I don't mean that in a, derogative way. It's an older game, and it's normally uncommon to see a developer take a game that's not really any kind of online multiplayer based. It's really more of a single player experience with online options. So anyway, I'll be right back.
I'll go ahead and read it, which is kind of weird because it is odd that game got a update. I played the game and I don't really recall it having any frame rate issues, but next up, despite being announced nearly 10 months ago, Sony's PlayStation Productions have yet to put out anything that might remain the case, as we've heard little since the initial announcement. And the long in development Uncharted movie that's supposed to release under this division has received yet another delay, speaking of season of delays, after losing its sixth director. Originally aimed for December 2020, it is now pushing for March 21. Crazy delay there. It is one of those issues of a movie I don't ever want to see come out because the casting for that movie is terrible. It is not Nathan Fillion, and we already got the best Uncharted little short anyways.
You know what's more funny is that it's come full circle. I don't know if you've seen this, but Tom Holland's been attached as young Drake for a while.
Unfortunately.
And I'm not really either way about it. I actually like Tom Holland.
I love Tom Holland. I don't, why?
It just seems like a weird fit.
Yeah. There's so many actors that could pull off Nathan Drake so well
but
as an adult.
The more funny thing is that if you remember when the movies first started being talked about, for a long while there, Mark Wahlberg was going to be Nathan Drake. And now as it goes full circle, he's supposed to be Sully.
I'm telling you, there is Sony people who make movies with Sony make some big drops sometimes. So I don't know how they do it. I just don't. Just cast Nathan Fillion. If you don't cast Nathan Fillion, then cast Nathan Drake. Oh man, the voice actor for him. Why can I threw myself off with
yeah, you've done it to me now, and even though I know his name, Nolan North.
Nolan North even looks similar to Drake. So cast him instead. He even sounds like him. But why? Why would you ever consider Mark Wahlberg? And why does it have to be young Drake with Tom Holland? I don't get it. We already saw young Drake in Uncharted 3. We don't need more of that. To me,
you know what I think it really is. I think the problem they have is that this whole time, I think it started being this thing of Uncharted got the movie deal pretty much after Uncharted 2 came out and blew up, right?
Yeah.
And I think it started being to a lot of people, well, now that the movie's still not out and Uncharted 4 is out, and a lot of people started looking at it from the viewpoint of, well, Uncharted 4 was a kind of interesting idea of exploring someone who's kind of out of their prime, still chasing this lifestyle and what effects that can have on them. And of course, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Skulls or whatever, or the movie was called, kind of did the same thing. But people are interested in seeing that, and a lot of people think, hey, not only do we have either Nathan Fillion or Nolan North, both people who are obviously similar looking to Drake, with Nathan Fillion going as far as to actually be part of an Uncharted fan project that was fantastic.
Yeah.
But people are okay with looking at the idea of them doing that. But you know why I think Sony's not? Is that they look at it from the standpoint of, if they're going to make this movie, if it's successful, they want to make it a franchise. How do you make a franchise of Uncharted when you start with your main character old?
Ask Die Hard. Die Hard's done it. Die Hard has exceeded 30 years at this point.
That is
I will
true.
say though, if I had to make the dream cast of this movie, it would be Nathan Fillion as Nathan Drake. We already saw him do it brilliantly. I would do Tom Hanks as Sully.
Oh, I love that one.
I'd love to see.
You know what's
that.
more funny about that? Isn't there a movie called Sully where he's a plane pilot?
I have no idea. There's a lot of movies Tom Hanks has been in that I've never seen. And then for Elena, I can't think of her name. She was in Gone Girl.
Hey. And doesn't he already look like Victor gosh darn Sullivan?
Yeah, he does.
And it's named Sully as the movie. We figured it out. We've got the casting for you, Sony.
Rosamund Pike.
Listen to us.
Who needs to be Elena. Look at that. Tell me that doesn't look like a pretty decent Elena.
Yeah, you've mentioned her before in your casting call for this.
Yes.
But I do think it's a good fit. I actually think Tom Hanks as Sully is a good fit. Besides, it'd be interesting to hear Tom Hanks talk like Sully. And I mean that from the standpoint of, part of what you'd want from Sully is for him to still remain most of the character that he is, which is kind of like a dirty old man.
Tom Hanks as Sully. Tom Hanks could pull off any character you throw.
Oh, he can.
He could pull off Nathan Drake. As a matter of fact, Sony, why don't you have him as retired Nathan Drake, and then you show him going through flashbacks of his life, and Tom Holland as young Drake? That's better than what you got now. Who cast Mark Wahlberg as Sully? I don't know. You're not making good decisions. Mark Wahlberg is a goofy actor, and he knows it.
You know what's weird is I used to not mind him, and then he started to get to this point where I'm like, I feel like I haven't liked you in a movie in a long time.
He does the same role every movie.
Yeah. But you know what? He makes a lot of money. I'm not hating.
I'm not hating either. I'm just saying there's way better choices that you can make. Including
next time,
not making Venom 2.
While we're still talking about PlayStation Productions, another product that was likely related to the banner that was canceled is a short animated film for The Last of Us that aimed to bridge the gap between the first game and the upcoming sequel. Images from the project were posted by the agency working on the product, but quickly removed after what I imagine was a very heated phone call from Sony.
That actually sounds like a really cool idea.
I'm assuming they didn't really want this out. There was the screen grabs are really interesting. So it's going to go through and show the in between years, and it was going to have there was a little bit that you got to see of apparently Joel is around a fire, and they're having flashbacks to some of the things he's done with Ellie and his own daughter and everything. And every time a flashback would hit, you would see a different art style. And just as an animated project that's trying to go through something and convey emotion, I think that that's actually a great use. If every flashback is kind of doing the same thing that The Last of Us did, where every season is kind of meant to encapsulate a specific tone and mood, then you can do that with the animation. If you go through and say, the point of this flashback is to show life before.
What a weird art style.
Oh, all right. But I kind of dig it. Like I'll be curious to see what it would have turned out as.
It reminds me of Scott Pilgrim, which is not the first thing I think of when I think of The Last of Us. It's weird.
But here's the thing. I actually like them trying to go out. I don't understand the point of canceling it. I don't see. I mean, definitely since it looks like it was a lot of the way done.
Now, would this have been Sony's movie division?
This would have been PlayStation Productions, which now the movie division is part of. So this would have been just a short animated film. But, it is what it is. But if you want to check out those screen grabs, I think it's pretty cool. And I just like to... I wouldn't even mind, games do this a lot with things like color palettes and whatnot, but what I love about animation is that there's nothing that's weird about animation suddenly stepping out of the animation style it's in. When it happens, there's that slight jarring moment, but the rest of the time you're kind of like, oh, I get it. Like after a couple seconds, you're in and you're like, I understand what's going on here. This is a tonal shift that they're trying to show something. And as long as there's a through line animation style that it comes back to eventually, then your brain wraps around kind of what it's doing. And I really like that idea. So... oh, well, it'd be really cool if they eventually just release what was done, but looks like that's not going to happen. Anyway, next up, Doom Eternal looks to be following the trend of mini shooters with what looks like the introduction of a battle pass for players to work through, as well as boosters that will presumably let players pay for quicker progression through the battle pass. These can be seen in Giant Bomb's recent 30-minute gameplay video towards the end. So first of all, if you're interested in seeing what the game looks like, which it does look really fun and phenomenal, go check that gameplay out. If you're kind of like me and this battle pass is slightly worrisome just because of recent Bethesda dealings with like the Fallout First and whatnot, I don't know. I'm hoping that they're smart enough to not take a big franchise again and over monetize it and mess with things and get a fan base up in arms over nothing. I think if it's something as simple as a battle pass, I think that would have been fine. If the boosters are aimed at speeding up battle pass progression, depending on how it's done.
I don't trust Bethesda with anything that is optionally earned, and then with the other side being money as the other option. I don't trust Bethesda anymore.
Yeah. It's weird, and part of it comes down because one of my favorite things about the original Doom 2016 reboot was the creation. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was called now. It's been a while since I played it, but I played it a lot and I loved it. You could make your own maps for multiplayer and go through, and people could play on them, and you could set your own spawns and stuff up for different things. I thought it was a really cool idea, and it was kind of breathing life into that same idea that they had going into like Fallout of like, hey, we're gonna let consoles have mods, and going into Skyrim as well, where it's like, hey, there's no reason that consoles can't have a little bit more flexibility like you expect from PC. But with Doom Eternal, they're taking that out. And that kind of seems like, okay, I'm not against you taking it out as long as it's not like you're seemingly doing it to be able to add it in later for a monetary purpose.
Right.
But things like this kind of bring you back to that thing of, even if it's not going to be that, it's very similar to something I was talking to someone about the other day. It's like when someone steals from you. At least for me, I know that I never think someone would steal from me until they've proven me that they would. But once they've proven me that they would, even if they don't steal from me for another 10 years,
it's still
the moment that something comes up missing, you have that thing in the back of your head. Hey, they were just here. Did they start stealing my stuff again? And it's not that you want to believe it, but it's that in the back of your head, they're capable of it.
Right.
So it's it's one of those, trust is hard to get back. And I think Bethesda's had a very weird 2019. I don't think 2019 was very kind to them. And I hope to see them rebound, but it's going to take a lot of goodwill moves, and I've not seen that from them just yet. So we'll see what ends up happening. But I hope Doom Eternal is very good and they see from the performance early on that it does not need to be over monetized with weird optional things that we'll just see. A lot of it comes down to seeing what it is and if it's game breaking like some of the Fallout or pay to win, like in a sense of like Fallout First was. But next thing up, this one's kind of interesting. Game Freak, the developer behind the long running Pokemon series, recently released Little Town Hero for Switch. But it appears that similar to the company's last non-Pokemon outing that was the beginning of this gen, Timbo the Badass Elephant, that the RPG A Little Town Hero, will be coming to PS4 in both physical and digital format from Japanese publisher Rainy Frog. Now, I don't know if it's coming to PC or Xbox. It's not mentioned there, but with it being a Japanese publisher, it makes sense that it's coming to PS4 first, if not anywhere else.
Yeah.
So we'll see what that ends up coming down to. That game was interesting. It didn't review super well, like you'd expect from a team behind Pokemon, but it didn't review poorly.
Right.
I'm interested in seeing what it was, or what it is.
It's one of those games that I'm waiting for it to go on a really big sale
before you. And actually, the thing is I'd be more likely to play it on Switch. I just feel like it costs too much. The ironic part is on PS4, it's probably going to be cheaper.
Didn't it launch at $30?
Yeah, but it's still $30 for something that's an unknown quantity for me. But it is something that does feel more right on a handheld from what I've seen.
I couldn't remember if it launched at 30 or 40.
I think it was 30. I'm pretty sure you're right. Anyway, next up in the news, despite Kingdom Hearts 3's not too far behind its release, Nomura has stated that Square Enix has 2 new teams working on Kingdom Hearts related content, as well as the team that wrapped Kingdom Hearts 3 recently, and lastly, its mobile department, with the added bite of info that one of the teams will be releasing a game, quote, surprisingly soon, end quote. Since then, Square has created a new Twitter account for what they're calling Project Xehanort, with the profile revealing a new mobile experience arriving in spring 2020, which if you would have asked me before they came out with this, I already thought they're having a game coming out sooner than you'd think. It's a mobile game. It's just kind of, from development time standpoint, it makes the most sense. And I'm not hating that at all. It's just that it made sense. The name appears to be a working title, though, with a Guess the Name campaign going on, where 10 winners will be selected from the entries if they can guess the actual name. With Kingdom Hearts 3 becoming what is undoubtedly the best-selling game in the series thus far by a pretty large margin, it's no surprise to me that Square Enix wants to tap into that fan base quicker and with a quicker turnaround. But 4 teams working on Kingdom Hearts is interesting.
Yeah.
My somewhat of a thought here is that it's not that they're wanting to pump out as many games. I think on surface level, you think, well, they're wanting to pump out essentially 4 Kingdom Hearts games in the next 2 or 3 years. I'm not actually sure that's what it is. I think one thing that might be happening is we have a team that's working on a game that could end up being cross-gen, and then we have a team that's probably working on either a spin-off title, and it might be a spin-off title for the Nintendo. Wouldn't be surprising to me. It would make sense. And that last team could be working on what's going to be essentially the big first next-gen only Kingdom Hearts. And what may end up happening there is we may see these a little bit more years apart, and it lets them have more time to kind of ferment and go. The big thing about this, I think, is that just because a team has started working on something does not mean they've entered full production. A lot of this, I think, comes down to teams that are going to be working on outlining what the plans are for the next few games, with Nomura kind of looking over the story and general direction, and then letting someone else be the main producer on it, essentially. And we're going to see maybe one mainline game, or even spin-off, if you want to call it, that's at least a more traditional like Kingdom Hearts in the next 2 years. I think that's potentially possible, but we'll wait and see. That's kind of where we are.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested in the direction that they're going to go after the Keyblade War saga is over. Or what's the official name for that?
The Dark Seeker saga.
The Dark Seeker saga, that's right.
I don't think it's a bad thing. Again, I really, my biggest thing I hope from here is that they both understand the somewhat disappointment from the fans on top of the really great sales for Kingdom Hearts 3. And I hope they look at both of those equally. I hope this is not a, Kingdom Hearts 3 was a little less than what it probably could have been in the eyes of many people. But it sold better, so this is the direction we need to start going. More shallow, not as much content, just to get the game out and make sure it looks good.
Yeah.
I hope that's not the way that they choose to spin this series, just because it sold well. I hope that they do a mixture of looking that there's a lot of new life and new blood in this series with new fan base coming in, but also look at what made the series kind of work and see if they can kind of mesh these two together to where you can get something that feels more clean and more Kingdom Hearts appropriate, but also feels new and like it's trying to breed out new blood. And I think what better time to do that than with the start of a new saga?
Yeah.
So you can kind of hit the best of both worlds. It's very similar to like what God of War chose to do with its soft reboot, where it really isn't a reboot. It is still a sequel. But because of it being a sequel and a completely new setup, they have the freedom to kind of go, we're going to change the way we play the game a little bit. We're going to change the way that you normally structure these games. We're going to change the way that we do storytelling with these games. And I think there's a lot of ways that they can make it still feel decidedly Kingdom Hearts while doing something that's new and drives in and appeases part of the new fan base. So
Right.
we will see.
And I am excited for that.
Yeah. Next thing up on the news, leaks abound. We've now had someone share a video of the supposed PS5 design and all, even going so far as showing the console startup sequence. Now, here's the thing.
It's not real.
You can go look it up. It looks good, and I'm not actually, whoever did it, I'm not... It actually looks great, and if it's what ends up being even remotely close, or even let's go this way, even though I'm 99% sure it's fake, even if this was the real thing, it looks great. The problem with it right now is that with the PS5's push towards the solid state drive and quicker loading and talking about eliminating times where you're not playing games, it seems antithetical to me to have a system startup sequence at all when you probably won't have to have one. On top of the fact that not only is this a system startup sequence, but the one that's shown in this video is like 10 seconds long.
It's not that. It's you're gonna have to have an initial system startup screen anyways, just for the seizure warning.
Well, and again, what I say, if they're going to have one, and I don't think it's impossible to say they're going to have one, but doesn't it seem like something that would just be the PlayStation logo, seizure warning, and that's it? 2 seconds.
Yeah, but there might be some kind of regulation against health warnings that have to be visible for a certain period of time. I don't know.
It's possible. I mean, games that normally do
and that could be something that
warning
just
are only
does.
2 seconds. But either way, it feels long-winded for something that's aiming to be quick.
Well, and I'll tell you why this is a fake thing. First of all, it has the App Store and Google Play on the screen, and what this is supposedly taking you to for the QR code that shows up on the screen is to the PlayStation 5 setup website. Why it has Google Play and App Store with no other context on there is weird, but also the 5 is too close to the S in PS5, way too close. It is not the same.
No, yeah, trust me,
it's not the same distance as the PS5.
It looks great,
logo.
and actually all the sound effects are really nice.
And this could just be an early build of one, because the console itself looks fantastic. That is exactly what I want in a console.
You know, the weirdest part of it is that the most believable thing of it actually is the console design, even though I'm not saying it's real.
Just can we please, the PS4 has it now, can we please get rid of that orange light when it's in sleep mode? Can we have it?
I don't really mind
a dull blue or something. I don't like the orange light.
But it's off to the side. It's not near as bright, and there's a lot of different things about it. But what I thought was interesting is that most of the design language looks like what they're already doing. We see Sony with the announcement of the new logo say, hey, you know, if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Right.
And what was the PS4's main design thing? They said we wanted to harken back the base model PS4. They said we want to harken back to the PS2, which is an era that people loved a lot. So we wanted to kind of look at the PS2, and when people think of the PS2, most people actually think about the slim PS2 because it was the most popular version of the console, and it was the one that lived for the longest. You know, they stopped making the fat version after about 3 years, and then for the next 10 years they made the slim. But with that,
the slim PS2 and the Xbox One X are my two favorite looking consoles
because they're sleek, slim.
They're sleek, they're slim, they're minimal. There's nothing like,
but minimal with a stylistic flair.
Yes,
like,
we were talking about that at work the
other
other day, and I was like, the PS5 or the PS4 Pro looks fantastic. I hate the look of the slim. The slim's rounded and ugly in a way. I don't like the look of the slim at all. The PS4 Pro looks really good, but the way that the PS2 Slim and the Xbox One X is just a sleek box is what gets me. I don't like the edges on the PS4 Pro. I don't dislike them, but I don't like those in comparison to just something sleek. Mm-hmm. That to me is not sleek. I don't like cutouts on things. Mm-hmm.
But what I was getting at real quick is that, you know, when you look at the PlayStation 4's original design language, which is trying to mirror back to the PS2, and you have this line in the center, and then if you look at this, it kind of looks like, okay, going back to that. There's a line in the center, but it's not a light this time, and it's not even a solid divide. It's just a piece of, it's like a little piece of just flare plastic that's not very big, that acts as a separator between the two. And it's like if you took a PS4, stretched it out a little bit widthwise, rounded the corners off, and then put the indicator lights that Saul was speaking of, the blue and the orange, instead of them being on the front or in the center or down that line, instead they're wrapped around the right-hand side.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with that design, and actually, it looks believable.
Yeah.
And if you look where that sticker's at in the top left corner,
it looks like
I imagine that would be where the PlayStation logo
emblem would be. Yeah.
So it's not saying that it's real, but it's a believable design that I actually think looks pretty good.
What I like about this so much is that it is very similar to what the Xbox One X looks like. except it's a little rounded on the two front corners, and that light bar on the top sets it off too. It's very sleek. It's very minimal. The only thing that I don't like about the Series X is how bulky it's going to be in terms of where it's going to be at. I much prefer stuff like this stylized, even if it has to be wider but slimmer. And I've said before, I actually like the Series X design, but for me, if this was the PS5, that is the way better looking console compared to the Series X.
And yeah, you know, over in the Facebook that you can go and join if you want, it's a Facebook group, Triangle Square to PlayStation Podcast, where we talk about stuff, ask the communities, takes questions, and of course all that. Someone shared a picture of the back of the Xbox Series X. Mr. Josh did, Josh Drago, and he was talking about, you know, making jokes at the expense of it, which is fine. I mean, it was like I already mentioned. I actually think that was somewhat on their mind when they were looking at all that. Is kind of this idea of like, because the system is just kind of there, it's going to get talked about a lot. And since it's not just like a genuinely okay, in my opinion, that's we do have to say that here. But the way I chose to go about it is, and my response to it was, I don't think that the system is remarkable in either sense of the word. I don't think it looks so good that you're just like, oh my God.
Yeah,
but I also don't think it looks so bad that it's, oh my God. I think my biggest problem with it, and it's not even a huge problem, it's just kind of where I'm at, is it's just a kind of bland design. And I mean bland in the sense of it blends in, and I think some people are going to like that aspect. It just blends in. But it just looks so unremarkable for a console, and in a sense of where normally most people, and I only say most people, a lot of people, and it could be most people, like their electronics to be simple, minimal, but they always like it to have some kind of design flair where you look at it and you go, I know exactly what that is because the design language is there. And the problem is if you took all the labeling off of the Series X, it doesn't look like anything. It kind of just looks like a black plastic box, and to some people they're going to really like that because it's going to fit in somewhere and then you'll never really notice it again. So if you're someone who doesn't like seeing your consoles, you can kind of just, and it's a weird thing for the people that know that it's going to have to go up somewhere because it's too big for their entertainment center. The upside of it is it's so big that it has to go up on the top, but because it's so basic looking and easy to blend in, you probably won't notice it once it's up top, as long as it's not blocking your TV. So, and that might be what the idea was. How do we have to make the system? Well, it's got to be big. We got to make sure that there's enough room for air. What do we do? Well, if we're gonna make it big, and there's a chance that people can't put it under entertainment systems, then what do we do? Well, we can make it look like a PC. It gives us the room we need. It ties into our PC roots, and then it also makes it kind of unambiguous, where you just see it, and you're like, oh, it's just a thing.
Well, for me, I guess that is the difference between what the Series X looks like and what that looks like, is that actually has a wow factor to it. Like there's something about it, how sleek it is. It's like the Xbox One X. When you look at it, you're like, that's a sleek looking system. When I look at the Xbox Series X, it's a sleek looking system, but there's nothing about it that wows me inherently just by looking at it.
It's just sleek in the most basic meaning of the word. It's like it's minimal and it's smooth.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay.
Yeah, it's sleek in that sense, but that's all it has going for it. I don't think that there's ever been a bad looking console in my opinion, other than the PS4 Slim. I was never a real big fan of the original PS3 just because of the glossy top got scratched so easily.
I love the design, and I actually love the jet black, but I'm with you. I understand what you're getting at.
Yeah.
And it scratches. And you look at my one in there, it's in pretty good shape, but it's still scratched.
Yeah, and that'll happen no matter what. I had the PS3 Super Slim, and on the front and the back of those, there was a bar of a plastic glossy black. I don't know how, but like within 1 month of owning it, it's sitting on my desk at home, nobody touching it or nothing. It was scratched to hell. I still don't know how that happens. It's just like and there's one concerning part on this, is that black glossy streak on the top looks nice,
but it would be the one spot that gets scratched.
It would be the one spot that's going to get scratched if you put game cases on top of your console.
Yeah,
guaranteed.
True.
But yeah, if this leak is real, which I hope it is, just because I like how much the console looks, then you fooled me for having your startup screen being so weird.
All right, next thing up, rumors are abound that PlayStation may be entering into another partnership with Kojima for his next game. These are mostly baseless from everything I've seen, but stem from Kojima's recent visit to PlayStation's Japan studio, which he posted pictures from on Twitter. And you know, if Sony does, and I think that partnership was good for both Kojima and PlayStation. The thing about Death Stranding being divisive, in my opinion, is that just like we were talking about with the Xbox console design, is they know that even though it's a divisive design, it's going to get them talked about, and getting talked about right now is worth more than almost anything. I think it's the same thing for Death Stranding. It had people talking about PlayStation and Kojima, and it helped both of their brands in the sense of their brand recognition only went further up. So, and not that they weren't both already high, but it kind of keeps you in the limelight, and it's a good move that they come out with Death Stranding so close to other moves that they're trying to do about showing the consoles off. So if you look at where Death Stranding's at, and then they show off Ghost of Tsushima, and then they come up and in February, hopefully they show the PS5, you kind of got a lot of PlayStation in a way that's you're hearing about it and seeing buzz about it without them having to show up at all the events that we've been kind of lamenting their absence from. So this might actually be a weird, interesting move in disguise that ends up working really well for them, but it's hard to tell right now. And I think that both would be eager to work with each other again, because I think Death Stranding was at least successful enough to warrant its existence from a monetary standpoint, and then everything else was just kind of like, hey, we just get extra oomph here, and it's just one of those things. No, there is no problem with being considered the console that has the weird, very different AAA game that is so different from anything else you'd expect. It's kind of what Sony's done for a long time, and that's a good thing. And you see it happen all around the board. Nintendo taps into that often, and I think Microsoft's starting to tap into that too, of having the somewhat off-kilter AAA game, because it kind of gives you that thing that all things want to go to. You want to have that slightly artsy vibe where it draws people to you because it's not the same as everything else.
Ninja Theory.
Yeah, that's actually what I'm talking about. The purchasing of Ninja Theory, I think, was very smart.
Yeah,
on that.
Ninja Theory and Obsidian are two of the hard hitters that I'm excited to see stuff out of.
Mm-hmm. Next up, while on rumors, Cyberpunk 2077 was allegedly delayed due to performance issue on base model consoles, with the original Xbox One giving them the most issues. It is claimed that the developer had a deadline, and if these issues had not been mostly solved by January, the game would have to be delayed. Something to note here, and I'm really glad that he said this because I was already thinking it, but you never know in games development. Cory Barlog of God of War and Sony Santa Monica fame came to question this rumor by saying that, quote, every game runs badly until you optimize for the hardware in the final push before gold, end quote. A comment that holds extra weight considering that God of War in particular performed very poorly until weeks out from its release. And that's something that Cory has been very vocal about multiple times in multiple different interviews. God of War, a lot of people were really shaky on God of War because 3 to 4 weeks out from it's supposed to be gold, it still ran poorly. But clearly we understand the game we got at launch, and it was great. So it's hard to say, but those are also very two different scaled games.
It is, and this is the kind of article that, like I was saying, that every now and then there's something that happens in the gaming world that puts the toxic, annoying fanboys out into war with each other. And this was that article of people saying, oh, well, see, now the Xbox holding things back. People, they're talking about all the current consoles. They're talking about the base PS4 Slim and the base Xbox. They're not talking about just the Xbox.
Now, part of what you're doing is talking about, this really did add some fuel to the recent fire of the whole Microsoft having their exclusives run across the original Xbox.
Has nothing to do with that.
This is exactly people, and I understand why people would want to immediately jump to that.
Yeah, this is nowhere near the same kind of thing.
But I do think it is different. It's hard to say. I mean, at the root of it, I will say that there is definitely some truth to the fact of this is a game that clearly people have, since it originally was shown, have thought was going to be a next-gen game. And because of that, it is having the most problems running on the Xbox One original, which was a very weak console. And so was the original PS4, but the PS4 did have the advantage. So, of course, the one that's going to give you the most problems is the one that has the least amount of power.
Yeah.
So when you look at that, though, it does make sense. Well, okay, so if a game that looks like it should be next gen is having problems on the base model, then how do games that are actually made for next gen going to scale down to the base model? And I do think it's a good question that I would love to see Microsoft actually, I don't know that they would, and I don't know that it'd be worth their time, but I personally, just from a technological standpoint, I would actually love to see Microsoft go, hey, we've heard fears and worries that games are going to be held back, and then show us a section of a game and be like, here's a great example of how we can show you how the game runs on here and how we can scale it, go all the way back to the Xbox One, and show you the differences between them, to show you how far they could push each
I
other.
think we'll see something like that at E3.
I mean, I personally would love it. I just don't know. From a marketing standpoint, I don't know how much that would help the casual gamer, but it might really help them because it would air some of the confusion out.
One thing that also kind of is prevalent in this is that people don't understand that the games that are the exclusives that are gonna be on both of these systems are gonna be exclusives. They're going to be first and second party games made by Microsoft,
and they're highly optimized for that one suite of consoles.
Yeah, and people are all of a sudden assuming this is one of those kind of situations where if you go back to the full article, you can tell where people are just reading headlines because it specifically says that it has problems on the original PS4 too.
Yes.
And this has nothing to do with next gen hardware on either systems. This has to do with one of them, one of the I can't pronounce his name, but he was talking about how these are holding things back, and that's what I've said all along. Console gen should not be this long. And then people buy the mid-gen refresh and they complain, oh, well, now the new console's coming out. Well, first of all, you did it to yourself buying this mid-gen console refresh.
Yeah.
Second of all, the more and more we go farther into the future with game optimization, which is going to be one of our main topics, is that you're going to see diminishing returns. You're not going to see the jump that you did not see a jump from the PlayStation 2 to the Xbox 360 or PlayStation 3 that you saw going from that to the PS4. It's just, you did not see that big of a jump, period. And you're not going to see that going this gen. People are running out, and this is going to be pop up later, to buy $5,000 8K TVs. This gen is not 8K. I'm sorry. We're not going to get that till the very end, and that's going to be 10 years down the road. Easily. There's no way that that games are going to be running in 8K, and that is going to be a normal thing for the average person playing games. 4K, just in the past 2 years, I would even go back a year and a half, has become the new norm for TV resolutions for in households. It's become the most affordable in terms of the resolution to the pricing ratio. You can get a 4K TV cheaper. You can get a 55-inch 4K TV for like $300, $350 now, where you can get a 27-inch 1080p TV for like $250. Like there's no reason not to upgrade at this point.
Yeah,
that wasn't the case 2 years ago. Even 2 years ago, when the Sony 55-inch that you came out, that was $550, and it was not 55.
It was a 43-inch.
43-inch, and it was $550 or $650.
It was $650.
I just bought a 43-inch 4K HDR TV yesterday for $220.
And this is not from a comparison standpoint of what I own versus what you own, but as somebody who's interested in the technology, I'm actually really curious how much different your TV from my TV looks.
Yeah,
and from a standpoint of how much does and this comes into something. It's kind of going into what you're talking about, and for a second, you're arguing that 8K is going to be 10 years down the line easily. But the ironic
10
part
years
of
before the average consumer has it.
I get what you're trying to say, but at the same point, people not even 3 years ago were saying it was going to be another 5 years before the average consumer had 4K TVs, and that's already not true.
People were saying the same thing about 4K when it first came out.
Sure, but what I mean by that is, and it brings up Moore's Law. So Moore's Law, for anybody that doesn't know it, is the technological rule that states that the number of transistors on a microchip doubles every 2 years while the cost of computers is halved. So you get double the processing power for half the cost.
Yeah.
Now, that technically does not account for diminishing returns.
No,
because what it comes down to,
returns are created because of that.
Diminishing returns are created because of your inability to process the difference that these microprocessors are actually bringing to the table, or because they're being used in a way that's like, well, this much microprocessors lets us run at 8K, but the human eye cannot see that much of a difference between 4K to 8K. Probably none. Realistically,
the crazy
where
thing
there's
is,
already people that look at what they consider to be diminishing returns from the jump from 1080p to 4K, which is more noticeable,
especially after
than what's going to be for 8K.
7 feet is what is that? That is the proven, or is it 8 feet? It's one of the two.
I think it's 5 to 7 feet. Where if you're after you get out of the 5 to 7 foot ratio, you can't see the benefits of 4K anymore.
You can see the benefits, but you can't see the differences between that and 1080p. If that makes sense, you can see the clarity.
It's harder to tell the improvements.
Now, but that's the thing, is that I highly, highly, highly doubt 8K will be a consumer product at an affordable price in the next 10 years.
It's genuinely hard to say.
I should say by the end of 10 years.
But yeah, and I do kind of want to lean into Moore's Law on this because I feel like we've already seen it happen with 4K, surprisingly. I'm going to kind of cut in the middle and say that we'll see it anywhere in the range of 5 to 7 years.
I could get 7 years.
Which still puts it at the end of that console generation if we follow the last few that we've been doing. But I don't know. It's interesting to say the least. I mean,
yeah.
We'll just kind of have to see how that ends up going.
This current gen of gaming is not going to be running 8K.
No, it won't. Not natively. For sure. Anyway, next up, Blue Point Games' insistence on that their next project will be their most ambitious by far is further reiterated in a quote from their newly updated website. They claim their goal is to, quote, define the visual benchmark for the next generation of gaming hardware, end quote. Now, what's interesting about this to me is that it does two things. Saul has often talked about what he thinks they're doing, and he's kind of changed his a little bit, but I think that this definitely gets us to the point of it's very unlikely that Blue Point's working on anything to deal with emulation. And I didn't really think so anyway because it's not who they are as a company. But I understand the need to go there. They're a company that's always prided themselves on bringing back old experiences in a new format.
To be fair, though, they don't say game, they say project.
They don't. No,
then they say that this will be a visual
benchmark.
That's
again, that doesn't. But if it's the visual benchmark for next generation of gaming hardware, it's not. You're not going to be able to do that with an old game unless you're remaking. Okay, what I'm saying with emulation, you're not going to be able to pull that off. So what I think here is that this does tell us that this comes down to an individual game. Not that they don't have multiple teams, but it's unlikely.
What if this is not going to happen? But what if the emulation system that they're making, or the emulation platform that they are making for PS5, is it could add ray tracing and all kinds of things to games from last year. So what if?
But how do you do that without? Because if it's emulation, you're having to run original code and then manipulate.
Super secret algorithm.
Either way, the other interesting thing to note there is that is quite a hefty goal for a developer that has staff of just around 90 people. That's in a very stark contrast to a lot of developers.
By the way, the cheapest 8K TV on Best Buy is on sale for $2,100. It is normally $3,000.
That's
actually a really good price.
That's consumer level.
Yeah, well, no, it's not. I wouldn't say it's the consumer level.
Most consumers
aren't going to pay.
It's upper consumer, but dude, what I mean by that is that is a consumer price enough. It's the same point of OLED has been considered consumer price once it got down to the $3,000.
Upper class consumer.
You got to remember, OLEDs used to be around $5,000.
That's true. But also, we just now got it so that some games, not even all games, are running native 4K on the current gen systems.
Yeah.
Let alone.
But games are not the only thing that TVs deal with. I
was talking about in relation to the consoles. Yeah, sure. We're not getting 8K this gen or this coming gen.
Next thing up in the news, and we're almost towards the end. While not a flat-out announcement of marketing partnership for the games themselves, it's easy to read into PlayStation's official partnership with Call of Duty League and Call of Duty Challengers. I typed this up very weird. But either way, it's not hard to look into their recent sponsorship of the Call of Duty things and see that this is very likely that Call of Duty is locking in with PlayStation to continue to run their marketing campaigns with PS5 as we go forward for at least the next year, if not longer. PlayStation, I think, has been a really good partner for them, and Call of Duty has always done the thing where their primary goal, because of how big of a thing they are and how much that they tap into a casual base that normally doesn't buy games as often, is that they look at this and say, we need to go with the person who has the biggest player base. And I think you saw that very easily in the 360 gen. They stayed with Xbox the entire time, and they did not switch until the beginning of the PlayStation gen when PlayStation started doing better. They look at it, and I don't think it's a thing that needs to be looked at from the viewpoint of clearly PlayStation's doing better, that's why they get the marketing for something like this. I just think that it makes sense for a series that's this big and that's this aimed at a casual thing to have your marketing aligned with people that are going to help pay for some of it because it benefits them as well, and still gets it out to the majority of the eyes that you'd really want it to be on. But that doesn't mean anything, and we may see it switch back over, or for the first time, we actually may start seeing more games do a non-console aligned marketing partnership, which would be really interesting. I'm unsure of how they would go about doing that because it's such a leap from what they've been doing. I don't know how they'd want to try and tackle that, but it's clearly not impossible. There are plenty of games that do not align with one group and just kind of go about their business. So we'll see. I'm not exactly sure what Saul's doing, so you just get me right now. So take it in. I'm gonna go ahead and start the next the next news section, even though it's more or less a lead into getting into our main topic. So it's time to either pat yourselves on the back or think over your loyalty. But a recent study conducted by Best SEO Companies, a survey across 1,008 people, determined that in the gaming sphere, as well as a bunch of other brands. They went through a bunch of them if you're interested in the rest of the survey. But in the gaming sphere, PlayStation fans are the most loyal, followed by Xbox, and then lastly Nintendo, at least in the three console manufacturers. And then in fourth came PC gaming, which is a little surprising considering the rise of PC gaming. But it should be noted, and actually, I'm curious to see what Saw has to say about this. I'm going to repeat it in case you happen to miss it. So, Saw, a survey of 1,008 people determined that, at least in the gaming sphere, PlayStation fans are the most loyal, which is not that surprising.
No.
Followed by Xbox and then Nintendo. I was actually really surprised that Xbox beat out Nintendo.
Kind of, sort of, too.
I'm actually...
You said 1,600? 1,600?
1,008 people.
Oh, okay.
Now, the way that they do these
very
is
small
but
sample size.
For anybody that doesn't know how sample size are chosen, they get random people to come in and essentially go through that. And because of the pool being so wide about what types of people they brought in, you get a varied multitude of answers. So that's part of why they do these and why they use these. They're not 100% aligned with what's actually happened out there, but they're meant to be a pretty close approximation of what the market is like.
I would argue that this study is very inaccurate, and that is going to say that now that the Switch has outsold the Xbox. That right there is proof in the pudding that I believe that Switch is still number 2.
I don't know that loyalty is in numbers. And the reason I bring that up is, and part of the reason that I actually have somewhat of a backing for why PlayStation may have won, if you don't think about it.
I know PlayStation won. That's without question. It's Switch versus
I know it sounds
Xbox
weird
at that point.
Even though I said it wasn't surprising that PlayStation won, I still in the back of my mind when I first started reading this was like, Nintendo won. Because Nintendo's got a very rabid fan base. But
Nintendo's fan base is very loyal. That's why Nintendo is still what I am going to consider the second highest grossing console for this generation. Mm-hmm. A console that came into the game 3 years ago has outsold the console that has been in the game for almost 8 years.
Yes.
So
7, but yeah.
Well, yeah. So that's just one of those things that, to me, that survey just seemed inaccurate. It's too small.
Well, and I think that when you look at loyalty, I think there's a lot of things, right? Loyalty isn't just numbers. I think loyalty has to be a lot of things. I think that it's probably, if I had to go through, and realistically, I think the way they're doing this is they're just kind of looking, and since they did this across a bunch of things, it wasn't just, this is things like food companies, all sorts of stuff, and they ask people going through. So this is probably a look at, and probably a small subset of questions. I didn't get to read the whole thing, but I read a lot of it because it was interesting. They actually made a note of this, and I thought about it myself. And this is part of why I'm also still surprised that Nintendo did not beat Xbox. They mentioned that while fans can be loyal to a game console itself, a main driving factor is a strong allegiance to game franchises that are unique to that system, which is something we've talked about a lot. Yeah. Exclusives have always been something. And I think that one of the reasons Nintendo's always been able to kind of keep afloat even in some of their worst times is that even when they have a console like the 3DS's launch, and of course the 3DS was able to steer their ship. Launch. The Switch's launch, but the Switch was still more popular. But go back to the Wii U. The entirety of the Wii U was a very rough time for Nintendo. And yet the games that still sold well on the Wii U in a way that you would not expect were all the staple series that people normally love. Yeah. It was things like, of course, HD Breath Collection of the Wild sold well.
Which I think, if I remember correctly, I'm going to get the numbers real quick.
Smash Brothers Wii U sold very well. The Mario game for Wii U sold very well. Those are the games that look, and I mean, you have to partially do it. It sold well for what the console had out there numbers wise, and I think that that's pretty interesting. Nintendo has got some of the most recognizable franchises, and that's interesting.
In the week following the release of the Wind Waker HD, the sales of the Wii U console increased by 685%. That one game increased the console's sales 100% sixfold.
Yeah, that's really wild. I didn't actually know that. I mean, I knew that it was a big jump, but 600% is a lot.
People underestimate the fan base for one of everybody's favorite Zelda games. I'm telling you.
And that's the game that made me buy one. You remember?
Yeah, and that's the reason I bought yours from you, is for that game, for that one game alone. And I will buy it for the Switch if it comes out for the Switch.
Yeah, absolutely. But
I see. For me though, like 1,000 people in a space that the market is so big, because you say numbers don't always matter in that kind of sense, but when you think about it,
I mean numbers and console sales.
Yeah, well,
just to make sure I was okay.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying is that you said that doesn't really matter in some of it, but I think it does because it shows you that 1,000 is not even 1% of the total number of users across all three of these platforms.
No, yeah.
So it to me right there, that's way too small. Get up to like 100,000, and it'll be more accurate.
It's just you got to think these are studies that are done on behalf of these companies. I understand it's hard to pull in something like that. So what you've got to try and do is be smarter and pull in a survey of people that are all varied in what they like. And if you get a strong group of people where you have a bunch of different things, like people of different sexes, different religions, different hobby natures, then you start to be able to break this down to where it's like the chances of these people liking the exact same thing do start to go away because of how. And I don't mean that we're all. At the core of things, we're all way more alike than we are not.
Yeah.
But the things that we like to define ourselves by, those are the things that when you start to kind of differentiate, there are some through lines that people tend to follow when they're one people. So you try and diversify your group of people as much as possible so that you can do that. Now, and it doesn't mean it's always perfect, but my main thing about this is that when you're looking at loyalty, I think you got to look at some things like, in terms of console sale numbers, the Vita has been what you could only consider a failure in terms of from a pure business standpoint of console sales to PlayStation. Now, when you look at the actual console, that console has one of the most loyal fan bases I've ever seen, and the attachment rate for Vita is so ridiculously high that almost every person who bought a Vita, and of course this is an average that's spread out across, so it's not that, but the average person owns more than 10 games for the Vita, and that sounds stupid because that sounds like what, but we're core gamers. When you start going to the casual market, it's very rare that on a wide scale, like PlayStation 4 has a really good attachment rate, and its attachment rate is only like 7 games per console. And the Switch's is even higher than that at like 9 games per console.
I thought it was
and somehow,
like 11 somehow.
It might be now. This is maybe all
what
the
you're about to
information.
say with Xbox is going to be mind-blowing if you're about to say what I think you're about to say.
Oh, well, the thing about Xbox and why I think it maybe comes into second place, see, PlayStation, I think you look at it from that. Even people on what could only be considered a failed console still look at it and push through it. The PS4 has had some ups and downs, but a lot of the loyalty, I think, comes from weird moves that they chose to do, and that loyalty comes from things that have been implemented that you really like, so you choose to stay with it. Sometimes it's exclusives, and I actually think when you get to the Xbox, the reason it might beat out Nintendo right now is just because of how consumer-focused all their moves have been, while Nintendo has been getting themselves in a little bit of a cluster with the fans by doing things like going to court over not letting people cancel pre-orders and all this crazy stuff.
Is that I've said it in the past before that Sony has made anti-consumer moves. I mean, they all have.
Oh, every single one of them.
Yeah, has. Xbox has. That's why I didn't get an Xbox at launch.
I think the thing you have to say about all companies, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but is that all companies, every company that exists in the world, at some point has to make an anti-consumer move. Otherwise, they literally couldn't be in business.
Right.
It's just a balance of how often do you do something that balances your ability to be somewhat pro-consumer, but still maintain a flowing business.
Yeah, and every one of these companies will continue to make anti-consumer moves. It's just how it is. It's left up to the people who love the companies to call them out on it. And people, there's this very strong thing that's been going around lately. If you've browsed Twitter in the past week, you might have seen it. I saw it twice now about people being loyal to brands and why you shouldn't be loyal to a brand in terms of defending a brand when they make decisions.
Yeah.
And actually, that's a very smart mindset, is that if you love a brand, you don't have to necessarily agree with every decision they make to defend them, because in the end, they really don't care about you. And they just care about the money you gave them. And I've seen a lot of people defend really coarse and dumb decisions. I saw people defend the Nintendo lawsuit. I saw people defend Sony. Microsoft, when they did the whole DRM thing. And there were points to these that made sense. But defending them overall, just saying just because you love that company is don't do that. Like, I'm not saying that's the wrong thing to do, but it's not the right thing to do. You need to speak up, because if you don't call out companies you love, and if you don't vote with your wallet when it comes to that, if I would have gave Xbox my money at launch for a decision that I made on, and multiple hundreds, if not thousands of people made that same decision I did, if that's a stupid DRM thing, I'm not buying the new Xbox. I'm going to go PlayStation. I'm certain that's why PlayStation's fan base is so big now, is because that one fumble Xbox made.
Sure.
And if you just continue to be a sheep in a way and just say, oh well, la 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 la, I love this company, they make no wrong decisions, then you are a problem. And it's not you yourself as a human being is wrong, but it's to me is something that you got to have more integrity as a person to that. If you defend companies and if you defend like Nintendo and constantly defend Nintendo despite some of their bad decisions, and I'm not saying that if you defend them, you're inherently wrong, but there are decisions that are defendable and there are decisions that, that are not. And there are a lot of times that these situations they put themselves in, they're not really defendable. And a lot of people like just get incredibly angry and argumentative over some of this stuff, and it's just like, hey, that dude just, they're just doing what they're just speaking their minds. They're speaking what they think. Sometimes it's just not the right way to go.
And unless you got more to say, I think this probably is a good way to wrap it off, because I agree with you in a lot of ways. But it's funny that I think that mindset of criticizing things that you love in general, not just companies, not just products, all that. I think you got to look at it. I think that if you really love something, you should be able to have an opinion on it that is, even if it's criticism, as long as it's actual, valid, constructive criticism, I think you should be able to voice it. And what I find funny about that is you're saying that, and this has nothing to do with you. This is not something I've heard you say, but it's funny how many times in other industries that doesn't become it becomes a thing to, it's almost like it's blasphemous to do that, because people are like, then you're not really a fan. And what I mean by that is, this is just one example that I know is very true for people that I know, and it's whenever a band that you really enjoyed puts out an album
that's different,
and it's so different, and you go, hey, my criticism here is not that I no longer like this band, or even if I do no longer like them just because they've kind of lost me as a fan in terms of what I enjoyed about them, I still have the ability to validly say, hey, as someone who loves what this thing has been and could be, where they're at right now, even if that's where they want to be, it's fine, but this is just how I feel, and I don't agree with it. And there's a lot of people that go, well, if you're a real fan of the band, you just adapt to their taste. And I don't think that's a fair criticism. That's a very weird thing to say, is that you shouldn't be able to tell something that just because you love something, if you love it, you have to wholesale agree with it. It's a very weird statement that a lot of people carry across all mentalities of life. And it's something that I think is... It's something that I wish would at least start to slowly change in society, because it bleeds through everything.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that like you shouldn't be able to voice an opinion over something. Like you shouldn't be able to voice that you are to defend Microsoft when they made the DRM decision. I'm not saying you shouldn't be able to do that. I'm just saying that as a human being and as a consumer, because at the end of the day, that's what we are. You need to take into account the business decisions, and you don't need to be heel to toe defending a business over something that is so, I don't even know how to describe it, controversial, I guess.
I don't know if I'd say it. I think that what you're probably trying to get at, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the best way to kind of summarize this is... Well,
you kind of summarize it the best with the bands. It's like, hey, I still like this decision. That's not the direction I wanted to see.
It's essentially a weight of how much the change or the decision that they're doing matters to you, because the thing is that there's people that I'm sure were probably like, I really don't agree with the DRM thing, but realistically I buy all my games digitally anyway, and I'm always online, so while I don't agree with it, it doesn't really affect me in a way that matters enough for me to want to vote with my wallet, so I'm just not going to do it. And I'm not saying that people who wanted to do that shouldn't have done that. I'm glad that they just went out and bought what they wanted, because they understood the potential negatives, but they weighed them against how important it really was to them and go, even if I don't agree with it, it mostly is okay. And for my entertainment, I just want to buy it. Doesn't mean I have to agree with it.
Right.
And I think that's another weird thing is people say that if you feel some way that you're, and it's just easy to extrapolate that from what people are saying sometimes. You could look at what Saul just said, even though I don't think it's what he meant. And I'm not saying that you did, but there's surely someone who heard what you just said whenever they're listening to this and think, oh, so anytime I don't like something, I shouldn't support it at all. I should always vote with my wallet and just not buy it. No, that's not what it is.
No,
it's that there are plenty of levels of things where you may not agree with them, but that does not mean that you can't support them. Because even if you love PlayStation and there's one aspect about the PS5 that you end up not caring about, but it's a pretty small one, and even though you don't agree with it, the rest of it's pretty good for you and it doesn't have that much of an effect on you, there's no weird decision in you just buying it and saying, hey, I can still buy and enjoy things that I don't don't agree with in some aspect. I don't agree with PlayStation censorship, but I still buy games on PlayStation. I still play my PlayStation.
You see us to that day. You see us do that too as well. And I'm not saying you need to vote with your wallet or whatever, because in the end I bought an Xbox. Yeah. But it's after they went back on these policies.
Yeah.
You can see how
vote when you're with your wallet when it's really important to you. When you really feel like you need to stand up for that.
It's just, and what I was mainly getting at is everybody in the world can voice their own opinions. It's just when it gets to a point of unhealthy defending a company, it becomes an unhealthy mindset that I don't like seeing, because people are better than that. They're better than recognizing, hey, you know, this company made a bad decision. You don't need to feel the need to defend them over that bad decision. I never once, as a big Xbox fanboy last year, I never once defended Xbox on that. As a matter of fact, I'll never forget that morning of like, that sucks. It looks like I'm going to be watching the PlayStation thing later. That's exactly what I said to myself. And I was actually, this goes back to way back when we were on three-way phone calls with Casey and Gavin, and we were watching that. And Casey was like, I'll still go buy it because it'll have Call of Duty. I'm like, go for it. And then Gavin was like, I'm undecided. But then, what was it? 2 hours later, PlayStation came out, and he's like, hey, see this disc? I could let you borrow it if you want it. Then it was said and done. It was like, somebody made a bad move, somebody made a great move. I'm going to support that company. But that doesn't ever mean I can't support Xbox again. Companies change, and they will make anti-consumer decisions that you can disagree with. And you should not feel the need to disagree with them.
The other mindset that I really wish would start going away is the fact that you bring up something a company did 8 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago as proof as to why you shouldn't do it now. And I understand it goes back to what we talked about earlier, where if someone ever steals from you, even if it's 10 years later, you're kind of like, did they start stealing again? That's the mindset that gets in people's mind when they think, you know, I trusted Xbox once and then they did this shady stuff, or I trusted PlayStation once and they did this shady thing. And they go, you know what? Even though it was 8 years ago, 12 years ago, they could do it again. So I'm not going to do it. And all I'm getting at is, I really don't like that in all walks of life. It's kind of like the thing where you see when people are like, oh, this person did this. Oh, this person supported this person. Well, that person who supported this person, guess what? He said something that I didn't agree with 8 years ago, and he has to still hold that exact same mindset.
That right there is pretty much what I'm talking about.
It's stupid.
A really cool correlation that's personal to me that is in the same vein except in a different industry is phones. Got a Google Pixel 2 XL at launch. Full retail price of $1,100. Right?
No. That was $800. Phones weren't over $1,000 yet.
Yeah, that's true. I must be thinking about the new prices. But yeah, within 2 years, that thing was lagging, restarting by itself. Called Google, said, "Hey, there's something wrong with my phone." The dude on the customer service line said, "Oh, just use your phone in safe mode for a week, and if it doesn't resolve, call us back." I'm not making my phone dumb instead of a smartphone for a week to find a problem out. I'm still within warranty. I'm still within 2 years. If not, I had just hit just barely over 2 years. I would have paid to get it fixed, but they were trying to dissuade me completely from anything involving that, and was just to use my phone in safe mode, uninstall all the apps and use it in safe mode. Why would I do that? So when the Google Pixel 3 came out, I'm like, I'm not giving Google any more of my money with the way they treated me last time. And not to mention, they didn't have any the real great features of the phone. That's not to say, though, in 2 years, the Pixel 5 or 6 comes out, and I'll go back.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Just one customer service experience like that can win you off a store. Doesn't mean it has to be permanent.
Yeah.
That will go away after time.
Well, we said on that longer than I intended, but it was part of the main topic. So we kind of have a dual main topic. Of course, it was that because I did know that bringing up the topic of brand loyalty was going to be interesting, because I think everybody's loyal to brands, even sometimes when they don't think they are. And I mean that in the sense of there's a safe version of loyalty where you're loyal, but you still question everything that comes through. And then there's loyalty to the point where it's blind loyalty.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what Saul's and I are saying is always try and avoid the path of blind loyalty.
Yeah.
Loyalty can shift at any direction because loyalty should be earned. And I do think that for the most part, PlayStation has earned my loyalty, but they could mess up at any time and lose it.
That's essentially
possible. The best way to say it.
PlayStation could come out this coming gen and say, hey, we were wrong. PS4 games aren't going to be backwards compatible. There is no backwards compatibility. We're not going to have any M-rated games on our system anymore. They can go all kinds of different ways that make me say, oh, well, it looks like I'm not buying that console right now.
Yeah. So either way, the next thing up, and I think that this one's real fun too, because I don't know, it's telling of a lot of things, but I'm also curious as to in the core crowd what is kind of most important to them. So a different survey across 8,000 consumers across Europe, and I mean, Spain, France, all the very different geographical spots within Europe. 8,000 consumers implied that statistically speaking, a strong majority, so 68%, are most likely to place improved visuals as the most important feature for the new console hardware, like the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. The survey also shows that despite new hardware claiming support for 8K resolution, they're not that interested in it, with around 40 people being mildly interested in it. And surprisingly, a higher percentage of people placed priority on motion controls, with a surprising 49% of the people surveyed eager for that functionality in next-gen consoles. Now, there's a couple of things here that I thought was really interesting. First of all, that it's only about better graphics. It's not that surprising. So if I'm going off of the surprising nature of these, the least surprising one is that people aren't that interested in 8K resolution, and I think that that's because of what Saul was already talking about.
That it is not.
Why would you be interested in a resolution that you don't see on a commonly spread consumer level?
I would argue that over 75% of the people in the United States still use 1080p TVs.
I would say probably not now. It's probably closer to 50%, just because they've essentially, when everybody was saying 4K is not really probably going to happen, all TV manufacturers are like, well, guess what? We're not going to make 1080p TVs anymore. So if you want to buy one, and of course, this is a country that is so happy to partake in Black Friday, that what is the one thing you see people losing their minds over on Black Friday? TVs, yeah, more than anything. So it's a really easy way that if you can get a pretty good TV set that's 4K, and what's weird is that you've seen it go from 4K over to 1080p, and then now these last year and a half, it's all been budgeted 4K HDR TVs. So now they're getting to the point where hardly anybody makes a 4K TV that's not HDR anymore.
Yeah, and it's crazy too, because the value of these over the past 4 years has gone tremendously down.
Well,
I say the value, the cost versus value.
Yes.
The TV that I got,
the value proposition
for what, I forgot how much I paid for it at Target. $279, I think, was for
something.
That TV.
Yeah, $279.
Is a 4K HDR TV. That thing looks fantastic. It works fantastic. It is a smart TV.
Saul's been so behind on TVs that he called me. Or actually, he didn't call me.
I told you last time we recorded or something.
Yeah, he was like, dude, TV's beautiful. Did you know that TVs could do this? I'm like, yes, I've had
did you
a
know that
smart
TVs
TV.
can cast without having to have Google Chromecast, which is a thing? But yeah, as an average, this is where I'm an average TV watcher. I am very casual in terms of TV watching and movie watching. I am not a cinephile anymore. I don't go and look for things, in TVs in terms of coloring and stuff like that. If a TV is vivid, if the color is accurate, and if it looks good, then I'm fine. There are people out there that will download or use their TV, plug their laptop or computer into it, and go to color accuracy websites and get that color 100%. I will use ratings.com for that. I won't use that myself. I'm not that worried about it. If the TV looks good and works well, hey, I love it.
Out of the box is what you want. You want it to look pretty great out of the box.
Yeah, and I'm the kind of person that I love technology anyway, so I will go tinker with the settings of any new big gadget I get for at least 30 minutes just to see all the settings that I can do in it. And for me, that is, the thing. And I would predict that by the end of this generation, we're probably going to get some kind of super sampling of 8K available.
I do think that's what it is. And I don't even know that it's something that they're really worrying about having at launch for 8K resolution.
Oh, they're definitely
I think what this is that even if it's there at launch, which I don't think it is, I do think that this is essentially what we saw with the Pro consoles already. This is, hey, your game's going to run at native 4K, but if you happen to buy an 8K TV, the game knows how to smartly checkerboard itself up to 8K or upscale to 8K in a way that is at least supported.
Is there even a graphics card for PC that can reliably run 8K?
I don't think so. But anyway, next up, of course, like we were saying, the first thing I was originally aiming at was graphics. Now, I find it interesting that in a generation, I think the jump from the PS3 to the PS4, the thing that you really had to look for was mostly graphics and graphic effects. So if it wasn't straight up resolution jump, which we did have from 720p on being the common resolution to 1080, there was some asking for 60 frames per second, though we didn't get it on most games. So when you look at it, most of the things did go towards graphics. And that was really what all the new specs were aiming at. Higher RAM and all that to push higher fidelity graphics and give you slightly bigger worlds. And a lot of the idea of bigger worlds was bigger worlds with better graphics. That's what you looked at. No, it's not, hey, can we do The Witcher's world size, but it looked like a PS2 game. It was, no, can we do The Witcher's world size and it looked better than a PS3 game still? That's always been the goal. So graphics are, of course, a big jumping point for next-gen hardware, and I think it is part of what drives people there. And I think most generations have made it easy to understand that's where you want to go with. But it makes me wonder if they're not doing a good enough job. And they're not far enough in right now that I don't think it matters. But at least as of right now, I don't think enough of the consumer base knows about the SSD and what that even really means right now. And I think the problem that's caused is that when people look at the next-gen hardware, their mind only goes towards the thing that they've seen in the past, which is, oh, yeah, it can look good Lord. Okay, just so Saul showed me for people who are listening on audio and you can't see his laptop anyway, a graphics card that can run 8K, and it's $5,531.99.
That is as much.
But there is free shipping.
You get Amazon Prime on it. Oh no, it's not eligible for Amazon Prime, so I still gotta wait a week.
Shipping.
Now this is something because you can still run it on like a RTX 2080, which is like a $900 graphics card. I'm pretty sure. This is a reliable 8K graphics card. That's not even a consumer graphics card. I don't. That's a car.
Yeah. Anyway, going back to what I was talking about. And Saul, I am curious what you think about it. But before in every generation, one of the biggest jumps is always resolution jumps, which we are seeing in a way here.
Yeah.
Midway through this generation, we got some form of 4K, so it's not as strong as it's been. We're like midway through the PS3 generation, we didn't get a system that could reliably play out 1080p. So it is softening that blow. This generation is more about having more native 4K instead of some kind of sub 4K version, and doing it at a higher frame rate. Hopefully, that's what everybody's kind of aiming for and looking at. So since we don't know what they're actually going to do just yet, since we have not that much information about it, I think it's interesting that, of course, the consumer mind goes to the easiest spot of, well, new hardware does mean better graphics, and I am excited to see what better graphics could be on a console on my new shiny 4K TV.
Yeah.
And what that still says to me, though, is that one of the challenges that both Microsoft and PlayStation are going to have is going to be finding a way to reliably market. And it sounds weird. I know a lot of people hate the idea of buzzwords, but buzzwords exist for the casual people who don't quite understand tech speak and can just look at it and go, okay, what's the phrase that captures what the PS5 can do outside of graphics? What's the phrase that can capture what the PS5 can do to the layman? And I think what they're going to have to find is what the buzzword is that matches the ability to describe the fact that load screens are pretty much a thing of the past, and that games will load a lot quicker and go through, and other things like it's speed and functionality that comes with that speed. The ability to look at a game and with the increased RAM go, hey, now you can suspend games, multiple games at once, and you can play 4 different games, and you can just go slide into the other game and resume it, and you'll be right where you left off. That's something that you're going to have to find a way to reliably market to people. And the fact that 68% of people are mostly looking forward to improved visuals instead of the speed, that's really, I think this will be one of the things of graphics don't change the way you game.
Yeah,
speed does.
There is still something about this topic that I find interesting, and that is that people will say that graphics don't always matter, which I don't think is a 100% true statement.
I don't think any of them are, Because like, if that was the case, Minecraft wouldn't have sold millions upon millions of copies.
I think that graphics matter in a very offhandish way for myself. If a game is prettier, like Red Dead, I was talking about earlier, Red Dead looks fantastic. That matters a lot when you're trying to be immersed in a game. It's kind of hard. It's a different kind of immersion to go from Red Dead and Skyrim to Minecraft. You could still get immersed, but nowhere near as effective.
But the immersion is not in trying to believably insert you into a world. The immersion is now hey, this is not trying to insert you into a world that's realistic and grounded. This is trying to insert you into a world that you're getting immersed in that is completely unrealistic. Yeah, and it goes towards different things. So to your point, and I think this is it. Please tell me if I'm wrong. To your point, a game like Skyrim and definitely a game like Red Dead, part of the immersion comes from the game design being, hey, how can we make this game feel really grounded and really realistic? Definitely Red Dead 2. There's a lot of things they chose to do. Well, we're not going to have any fast travel. Okay. So what are we going to do? You have to ride your horse or walk everywhere. Okay. That is towards the aim of realism. Are people going to be okay with it? Do some tests? Yeah, people seem like they're okay with it. All right. So if we're going to make it to where you can ride your horse and shoot people and everything, how far do we push the realism line, and how do we make the rest of the game cohesively and synergistically come back into that? So you look and go, well, all of these things are realistic. So the next thing we need to make sure that we're doing is making a world that is so, to the max of our ability at this particular moment, is so realistic that when you're in it, it feels like you're just looking through a window in time, but with a little extra control and still gamified. But the rest of the things that are still gamified are easy enough from the way that we're framing them to suspension of disbelief that it works out in the favor of being immersive in a way that feels realistic and grounded, but still gamified, so it's fun for people to play.
Right.
And I think that you're exactly right. In a world like that's what you're looking at.
Yeah, it's a very wild mixture of a game and a simulation.
Yes.
And, you know, that does matter. It may not be anybody's first priority, but it's the reason why games evolved into how they look now and how they keep evolving onto the graphics. It is a very common thing for graphics to be a desired feature of a game. But that doesn't go to say that games like Darkest Dungeon, like kind of hand-drawn style graphics, they're crisp and they're beautiful. But then you get games like Monster Hunter, The Generations on Switch.
Oh, yeah.
It's a 3DS port. It's kind of muddy. It doesn't look pretty, but it's still a fantastic game. And when you go into it for what it is, it's a handheld game that you could take anywhere, and it's a full-blown Monster Hunter game. It gets the job done. You don't negatively look upon it in that kind of sense.
Sure. Now, going back to your Monster Hunter point, to your point, I actually think that while it's definitely a boon that Monster Hunter World looks as good as it does, I actually think that if you stripped Monster Hunter World down and made it a little less pretty, it would not affect people's enjoyment of the game one bit. I think the game still would have sold every bit the same.
Every Monster Hunter in the world, and this is just my opinion, but every Monster Hunter other than World has always looked subpar. They have always looked muddy. They've always looked kind of blocky. They've always had kind of an ugly tinge to them, but they still were stylish games. Yet they are still amazingly fun to play. They're grindy. They're repetitive. They get you sucked into the world for what it is, and then you love it. Graphics at that point are looked past. They don't matter to you at that point. But then when you have graphics introduced,
they don't matter as much.
Well, no, I was going to say, no, listen, they don't matter to you at that point in time. But when Monster Hunter World comes out and you see that, you're like, man, that's a pretty game.
Yeah, well, what I was actually getting at is even if Monster Hunter played every bit of the same but looked like Life of Black Tiger,
yucky.
I'm pretty sure at that point people would be like, well, the graphics are too atrocious to make up for the gameplay. And part of that comes down to Life of Black Pie looking like a late PS1 game. Like, it looks like it's someone who's just learning how to make a 3D game.
Yeah. And I think that graphics matter the most when it goes into a new generation of gaming.
Clearly. And that's why you tend to see more linear games be launch window games, because they're games that can look and say, how can we make sure that this game looks so crazy, like, oh my god, this is what you couldn't do in the previous gen.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big thing. But
for me, this survey is kind of weird because it kind of goes back to the general consensus of gaming. And that is where us as core gamers are completely the minority.
Yes.
And, you know, I was reading something, and I can't remember if it was on Twitter or on Reddit. I think it was on Twitter, about how people, this guy had a friend who played Call of Duty. And every time a Call of Duty come out, he'd play it. And that's all he ever really played. He did not realize that he got PS Plus games for free. He did not know that was part of the service. There are thousands of people like that, hundreds of thousands of people that play games like that. They're not aware of the services that the console offers. They're just there to play their yearly games. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But when it comes down to like someone like that who does not pay attention to you know, numbers in terms of like what their processor's clocked at, how many teraflops your system has, when they're just caring about the games they play and nothing else in the world, they are going to be the main ones looking for, hey, that game looks amazing. They're going to be the main ones who there's not really much else for them to kind of like latch onto because they don't care about anything else. And I do think that it is important with this kind of gen transition. The visuals itself are going to look crisper and cleaner, but that's, to me, you're not going to see a jump. And I said it earlier, you're not going to see the same kind of jump in visual quality that you got from the PS2 and the Xbox to the 360 and the PS3. You're not going to see that here. You're going to see a much more relaxed slide in. It's going to look crisper. It's going to look sharper. It's going to look cleaner.
It's almost like taking what we have now and refining
just polishing it
yeah.
and making it look very shiny compared to what we have now. But what we're gonna get, and this is what I am most excited for, because people
shiny metaphorically, by the way. I hope no one's hearing that and thinking, "Why don't my game to look plastic and shiny?"
Oh yeah, please don't be Halo 5. But yeah, for what I'm looking for, because I know for a fact, I know how game engines work, and I pay attention to game engines and how they operate, ragdoll physics, stuff like that. I'm looking at more optimized game engines. I'm looking at better physics in the game. I'm looking at better draw distance, stuff like that. I'm looking at better textures.
I think one of the big things, and this comes down to, this question of what is most important to you across the console generations is going to come down to what the break is between core gamers, casual, core gamers, and then what I kind of call casual core gamers, where there's somewhere in between, and then casual gamers. I feel like it's going to be a very different answer for all of them. But I think one of the things that a lot of core gamers, including you, and it matters a little less to me, though I do like the ability. I think that we're already starting to see it, so it's only going to grow the next gen, is control within your game. Used to, the idea was that you had such limited power in your consoles, and you wanted to make sure you used it all, that you have to do everything. You have to frame your exact field of view based off of what you can render reliably.
Yeah.
So a game's like, well, no, we can't let you have a little bit more field of view because the engine's not optimized to show you this extra 4 inches per side, and you're going to notice screen tearing or texture pop in that otherwise would have been hidden if we obscure the field of view to this maximum area.
I don't think you typically get screen tearing when field of view changes.
Well, probably not, but my point being is that you're going to notice some stuff that they otherwise would have been able to hide because they've optimized their engine. And actually, there was a great thing for Horizon Zero Dawn where they talked about the world loading in as you moved your camera.
I was going to say, the load screens in typical games. People don't realize that, like in Doom, you get on an elevator, that's a loading screen. You're not just on the elevator for a half a minute to a minute. You're in a loading screen.
All it is Tony Hawk's American Wasteland on steroids.
I don't remember how that game was.
You don't remember?
That game was terrible. So
that was the first game that ever had the thing of of marketing point of no load screens.
That game was
and you know what it was?
No.
It would be between levels. You'd get on a bus and you'd stand in a bus, and I think you might have been able to walk around in it, but essentially it was a load screen.
Yeah.
And all it was doing was, hey, we're going to find some clever marketing way to hide the fact that we are loading your game. Now, clearly it worked because people like it.
I forgot I did play something else this week, and this is going to come into this right now. Blair Witch got on Games Pass.
Oh, yes.
And I thought, you know what? I heard this game is terrible.
I've heard it's terrible,
but it would be interesting for me and Andy to play this game. And this was last Sunday. And that game gave me the biggest migraine in the world. First of all, the screen, the frame pacing itself is terrible. The frame rate itself is terrible. There's a jitter when you move the camera left and right that ties in with the frame rate that just makes you sick feeling. But not only that, there's parts in the game, PT, you go through the door a couple of times, but every time you open the door, the hallway's the same, then it would change, but it was seamless. This game had you believe that you're running around in circles, kind of in a way, like you take off on one path and then you get to the end of the path and boom, there's the camp you just ran away from. And you're like, how did this happen? The game cut. There's a cut in the game that's noticeable of the things around you cutting to the new scenery. Like it wasn't even blatant, or it wasn't even hidden. It was very blatant that you were running and then all of a sudden your screen flashed for a second and your surroundings had differences in them.
So how does this tie into the topic, out of curiosity?
So
I feel like you have something.
That's a terrible form of not hiding your loading screens well. And I think that people will notice that kind of thing, and then they'll not realize that technically what they play in every game-to-game basis does that to an extent. Is just hidden really, really well. The talent that worked on the game is remarkable.
Yeah, sure.
But on top of something like a game, like physics being better, game engines being more optimized for collision purposes, weather purposes, all kinds of different aspects. Something that I have been campaigning for like the past 5 years is that we finally get it so that every game is a 60 frames per second, perfect. No dips, no drops. And I think that this is going to be a thing where we actually start seeing that. And what's weird is we've slowly seen games get these pro updates and even updates in general to make them run faster. Just earlier in the news, we had one for Dying Light to fix the frame rate. Frame rate is such a important part of a game that it is very, very much so needed to get a complete makeover in terms of consoles, and that we need
a new standard.
A new standard, yeah. And I do think
which we've seen changing. A lot of games have options that either
Resolute
actually
or
do make the game go to
action
60 or make it unlocked so that it can get as close to 60 as possible.
Yeah, you get action, so you get 60, you get movie, so the game looks better. But I hope that games run more flawlessly. I hope that the SSD is still something that I hope for in the PlayStation 5. It's still something that I'm so skeptical on until I actually see it with multiple games. Because we don't know for sure. Is it only Sony first-party games that can be, utilizing this kind of technology, or is it all multi-platform games? How is this really going to run? And people do say, like, hey, loading screens, there's no loading screens with SSDs, which isn't really true because they're still there. Like, my loading screen on Dark Souls 1 Remastered on PS4 on my SSD is like probably 20 seconds. Without it, it's probably about 40. On my PC, Dark Souls 3 loading screen is still about 10 seconds. It's still there, just less noticeable.
Now that is SATA driven for tech people. That is a SATA driven SSD and not one that's
NVMe.
Yeah,
which is what this one's supposed to be.
Yeah.
For those that don't know, NVMe is a direct connection on the motherboard that is.
Doesn't it use the PCI?
PCIe?
Yeah.
Technically, no. I don't think that an NVMe.
Well, I'm not trying to weigh it down with tech talk because some people don't understand that.
Yeah,
stuff.
I don't. All I'm saying is I don't think that the NVMe port that you plug an M.2 into, I don't think that is considered a PCIe slot.
Yeah, that's what I was curious. I've never seen one. I know that they're different. I've never seen one.
Yeah, mine on my motherboard is actually hidden, and I didn't even know I had one when I bought the motherboard. I didn't know until months later that, hey, there's this piece of stylized plastic inside, and I noticed it had a screw on there. And I'm like, that's a screw to undo. That's a screw to undo that piece of plastic so I can insert an M.2 drive and then screw it back on and it hides the M.2 drive.
Interesting.
Which is a very common thing nowadays. But games just performing better. And, like I said, graphics, people will say graphics don't always matter. I think they do. I think people will say graphics matter the most. And it's a very mixed bag. You can have a game that has fantastic looking visuals but runs like a turd.
Yes.
And you can have the exact opposite. I think that you're going to hit that perfect medium of a game performing really well. Game physics and immersion aspects of the game are going to come to life better and run better. You're going to have a game that is going to be running at 4K. I doubt we'll get 4K 60 and everything, but we're going to get at least 1080p sampled up to 4K 60. We're going to get games that run better. And what gets me about this survey is that, people are saying that this stuff is going to look better. And that is a very probable thing. That's honestly, if you're hitting the survey up with the correct answer, that's the correct answer. That is what I think that people are looking forward to the most in a sense. Well,
and see, going back to, if it was more of how interesting it is, the casual thing, but when you really think about it, the casual market is often in the scheme of bigger people and talk. They're often kind of ignored as if they're not really important, even though they clearly are. They make up the majority of the 100+ million consoles sold on PS4.
Just to cut you off real quick, I do want to make it sound like, or I do want to iterate that when I say casual and I say the people that are just playing Call of Duty yearly, that's not a slight in the slightest to anyone who does that. Like, I'm not.
Oh yeah.
I don't have a problem with you doing that at all. Like, that's how you play your games. That's how you play them. Go for it. That's not me, but that's not me criticizing you for doing so.
It's like people who listen to music all the time and then people who only listen to music when they get in the car because the radio's on. You know what I mean?
I would even argue that it's people who listen to music every single day of their lives, and there's people who have DACs for their phones because they're audiophiles.
Yeah.
There's an extreme, and then there's a casual.
Sure.
Being casual doesn't mean bad.
And there's always somewhere in between. So, but going back to the idea of the more casual market of the people who do buy the yearly games, it really makes even more sense that if the main thing you do on your console, right, is essentially play a handful of games that release once a year or once every 2 years. Like maybe you play every Battlefield game and every Call of Duty game, and let's throw a sports game in there, every FIFA game. Those are all big games, all series. So you play those 3 series, and every year that's essentially all you play. There may be a 1 or 2 in there that is surprising, but for the most part, that's what you're looking at. If you're buying a game every year, what you really want to see on top of just making sure the game is still fun, one of the things you'd want to see is, well, if this is one of the only things I'm doing every year, I want to see a jump in quality. And if you're looking at something going, wow, Modern Warfare actually looks really good in comparison to Black Ops 3 or Black Ops 4. It's like, okay, wow, this is a real big jump and I like it, or I dislike it, or whatever. But it is something that makes more sense. That's enough to kind of be like, hey, you know what? The game is still the game I like. They made some other small changes, but it also just looks better. And it is a quick way to justify a purchase. I'll be like, you know what? I'm glad I bought this. This looks better.
Surprisingly, it's kind of rare.
What do you mean?
People that I know personally that only really play Call of Duty yearly, they don't think that way really at all.
Really?
Yeah, they don't really.
See, and that's me trying to put myself in their minds, but you know, I feel like I could see that. If it looks better, you're like, wow, it looks better.
Years ago, I can't remember what platform this was on. I'm going to assume this was on Reddit because I did not have a Facebook, I did not have a Twitter, but years upon years ago, this might have even been on like GameFAQs forums, people were talking about as Black Ops 2 came out last gen.
Okay, yeah.
And people are talking about the game, and I remember seeing a comment on there saying this game looks too cartoony. Nobody at all addressed that in a serious way. Nobody at all was like, we don't play, like the comments were like, well, then stop playing the game. We don't care about that. And then stuff like that. Like, it's very rare.
Well, cartoon, I think I get what you mean. And I'm not saying I'm right or you're right or wrong, whatever. But that is a little bit of a weird example. I wish it was something a little more concrete than that because cartoony doesn't imply that the game looks worse. It can look cartoony in style, but actually be more detailed.
Well, I'm just saying that
you know what I mean?
To me, that kind of was the stagnant point for me that I kind of saw, like, especially with Casey. They don't, like, these people don't really care that much about the visuals of the game in that kind of sense. At least some of them don't. The ones that I know, they don't really go to look for that kind of thing in terms of upgraded graphics. They don't typically will mention that. They may think it internally, but I've never heard it outspoken in any of the personal friends that I have that are very casual.
So even if it matters to them, maybe it's not at the forefront of a decision. Like even if they see it and they enjoy it, it's not at the forefront of why they're thinking.
They're going to get it yearly regardless, unless something comes out about it beforehand that they don't like. And then that's why these games keep such lively multiplayer communities year after year after year, because you still have people playing Black Ops 4 or 3.
Think about and the reason, and even then, it's hard to separate what is core and what isn't core. So, like, you go to a YouTube video for Call of Duty Black Ops.
Oh yeah, that's something
4,
we don't
right?
have. We don't have the credentials to.
We don't
to confirm that.
But think about it. Let's just say that Call of Duty Black Ops 4, right? Let's say it gets its reveal trailer gets 60 million views. I don't know what an average is on it.
See, I don't like numbers like that either.
But my point is that you have millions upon millions of views. Okay, let's say that you have 350,000 likes, 350,000 comments.
Yeah.
And that's uncommon, but let's just use that number. What percentage of that comment is casual, if any? If any. When I think about casual, I think 90% of the time it's people who just see stuff, they like it, and instead of making a big deal about it because it's just something they enjoy. It's not like necessarily a lifestyle for them. They just go, new Call of Duty look cool, or new Call of Duty look kind of bad, and they just leave it at that. They don't go and comment. They don't go and do that. And if they do, it's more on Facebook with normal friends and not people they don't know. And I think that the difference I noticed between core gamers is that they're a lot more likely to interact and discuss things in a heated manner, even sometimes, with people that they don't know. Whereas I think a lot of casuals are like, well, I don't really care. I'm just going to talk to my friends about it, or people I play Call of Duty with.
This is where we don't have their credentials to discuss this in a way, because you have the casual audience of Call of Duty who will play that yearly, and that's the only game they play. Yeah. But then you have the hardcore Call of Duty fans that are only casual that do that, but then will be the ones in the comments.
Yes.
That's the only game they play, but they care about it so much that they're that they literally
play it every day of every year.
I wouldn't even say that much, but I'm talking about
but there are people that exist like that.
They're the ones that watch like pro Call of Duty YouTubers, and they watch loadout videos.
It's a subsect of where they're core Call of Duty players.
Yes. But in terms of like an average gamer, they're more probably, casual than most.
Yeah, they probably wouldn't even imagine themselves.
Which is not a bad thing.
It's weird. It's almost like you're a core gamer by proxy of one game.
This episode's almost 2 hours long.
Yeah, hey, it's upside. We didn't have one last week. Now we have an ultra long one. Thank you, guys. I hope you enjoy it. But either way, I mean, we're probably towards the end of wrapping this up. But I do find it interesting. The one thing that we haven't actually talked much about, but that I find crazy here, is that motion controls came and went, and most people just seem to be kind of over them. The Wii had its moment, but everybody else, it was like they were chasing a dying market.
To me, motion
just
controls...
for 49% of people to be eager for motion controls to show up in some form or fashion in next-gen consoles.
Motion controls to me is a fad, just like 3D gaming was a fad.
This makes you wonder, though.
Those are both terrible things that I don't care for.
Is this idea of motion control more in line with what they're expecting and seeing from motion control now with VR units?
That's different. That's a completely different thing. VR is an expectation where there's only been 1 to maybe actually, I'd say probably 3 instances off the top of my head where motion controls did really, really well.
Yeah.
Breath of the Wild did it pretty good. Drake's Uncharted, Drake's Fortune, right?
The Vita one?
The Vita one.
Golden Abyss.
Golden Abyss, that did it really well. As a matter of fact, once you got used to that, it was hard to play it without it.
When I got used to being able to adjust your aim by moving, I actually got really good with that.
And Gravity Rush on the Vita.
Yes,
those are all games that like where motion controls were actually done fantastically well.
Yeah.
Any other time other than that, I don't care for it ever.
But it's like the game almost has to be designed from the ground up with that idea in mind.
Yeah.
Of like, hey, we're going to implement motion controls and they're going to matter.
And I think that it's
and being blended with real controls.
Yeah, and I think that that's where the fat happens is that people think, oh, hey, everybody's talking about the motion controls in Breath of the Wild or Gravity Rush, and I got to get on this. Yeah. And then they make a very subpar experience, and that happens more times than not.
Well, what I actually think may be happening here, and I'm real curious to see this, is that a lot of people, when they see VR, and then they definitely see one of the more complex, not complicated, but more complex and more... I'm trying to think more nuanced motion controls that things like the Oculus Rift or the HTC Vive give you. I think people look at those, and because they're much more refined motion controls,
yes,
and even like what Oculus is doing now with the Oculus Quest, yes,
the wireless one.
That's got now the cameras can sense your hands, and on certain games you can use just your hands as the controllers, and it's supposed to be, it's supposed to be nuanced enough that it can notice all your fingers moving. It's what the Kinect was always acting like it could have been in 2010 when they were like, you'll be able to draw a piece of paper and hand it to Milo.
That? Yeah, I was going to say that's what it was. It was that, I think I brought it up not so long ago, Peter Molyneux's lion-ass game.
But
that game never even came out.
My point being is I wonder if the motion controls that are with VR are making people wonder what it would be like if you had that level of motion control support in games that were not VR compatible. And it's almost like, is it accidentally reinvigorating a subsect of gaming peripherals that have otherwise died off because of the interest of an entirely different medium showing you how they can work? Like, and it's weird because you think in a lot, or if it's in there because it's people who want to be able to control UI and stuff without having to use a controller. That seems like a small subset, but if it's done right, I could see people really, really, really wanting that feature.
I'm still on the...
Again, what the Kinect on Xbox One was supposed to do and didn't really do.
I'm still on the route that we need to make it so that headsets like the Quest and any other Oculus and Vive product can take a detailed... picture of your hands from different angles, and then whenever you have your hands in the game, it's your hands. So if you have tattoos on your hands,
I get what you're saying. Yeah,
it'd be more immersive that way.
Yeah,
because games like Skyrim, where like you see like your hand, and then you see like 2 inches of your wrist, and then it's just there's nothing else there. Don't do that.
But even then, if you're playing Skyrim and you chose, which I mean, there's at least options in Skyrim, so it's a bad example. Let's go to a game where you're not a creatable character. Let's go to a game where you're a white guy, and then say you're a black guy playing this white guy, and you look out to your arm, and it's just a white guy's hand. Well, that's not very immersive.
And Skyrim's just done badly because you could just render the armor there.
Oh, I mean, yeah, but
there's no armor there or robe or anything.
Yeah,
and Bethesda just did it for a quick cash grab.
Well, actually, dude, I really do mean this.
I know the game is pretty good. Well, but still.
But I think part of that comes into weird clipping and stuff that could come through. It's like, hey, it's just easier to show you your hands. But what I was going to say, lastly, in regards to that, though, it still comes down to, I feel like you're viewing it still, because it's just easy to do, you're still viewing that idea of those types of motion controls within VR because it's where we've seen it succeed and excel. But what happens if you extract those same ideas or same basic principles of motion control and gave them to people in games that were not VR compatible? I wonder if there's games, and okay, say it this way. Think about the original premise for PS Move and the Wii and all that, right? And PS Move for sure, because the Wii was just motion, and it would look at your movement on a normal X and Y axis kind of, whereas the Move, and one of the big things that people thought was going to be a differentiator for it, is that it could look in real time about how you were twisting your wrist. So if you held a sword in a Move game and you twisted your wrist, your hand would twist with it. Now you see that in VR right now on PSVR, but then you see it in much more extreme detail in things like HTC Vive and whatnot, where they have individual finger controls and whatnot. And then of course the Quest, where you can literally be holding a sword, lift one finger up, and then your finger would come off the sword or something like that.
That's
what I think is happening is that there are people who are not as interested in VR or at least are still skeptical about it, but like the idea of playing a game like Skyrim, not in VR, but where you could still swing your sword yourself and use your shield yourself. And that might be some of who this group is. People who are wanting to play normal games in normal TV presentation, but with some really good motion control. Like, could you imagine, I'm sure that this does exist, somebody who wants to play, and I'll go back to one of my experiences. On the PS Move, Killzone 3, I played through the entirety of the game with the PS Move sharpshooter. And it was great. It's fantastic. And I often lament that was one of the only games that was a shooter for that console that really from start to finish felt right. Now, PSVR, I think, immediately has already solved that with a number of great shooting games that use the PS Move aim controller, and the setup is a lot better with the way they chose to do it. But I imagine that there really is, and I would even be in that market, as crazy as it is, days where I don't feel like playing VR and putting the headset on, but I'd still like to play a shooter where I can aim at the TV and shoot and everything, just with a gun. I kind of could see myself doing that, and I could see other people wanting to do that.
Yeah,
not a huge market, maybe, but I still could see it. So if you look at 49%, it's probably mixed up of people who want to play games that way, but without VR, people who want to play games that way with VR and motion control, and then people who want to do something simpler, like probably control the system's UI and whatnot with their hands.
I don't want to do that. That's like touch controls at that point. I don't want to do that.
It's just a really high percentage, man. And that you try to extract what the driving factor would be from that is so weird.
Yeah.
Like, what drives the want for motion controls when we've seen it come and go and fail? Like, clearly the European market was not some abnormally large market for PS Move. It wasn't.
It also could be a combination of people really wanting that kind of stuff back, but also thinking of VR and just answering that question as a VR question.
It very well could be, but if so, then that's interesting because it kind of goes away. Which you've been saying it's going to grow and that you think it's here to stay, but you're still on the idea of VR, at least on the console level, and even maybe on the full-on level, being a little bit of a.
I've said fad in the past.
Yeah,
I think realistically it's just more of a niche.
Yeah,
I don't think
like it's here to stay, but does it ever leave niche? Probably.
Yeah, and I don't think it ever will.
I don't know,
unless it just starts to become more affordable.
Yeah,
because I think more people would get into it if it was more affordable.
Well, clearly we've seen that with the PSVR numbers grow whenever they drop the price down. So either way, I think that's a good wrapping up point for the episode. But the community's take question, since we will be back to that next week, is going to be hopefully a simple one. Yeah, hopefully. So far, our backup audio has not failed us, so we're good.
As long as everything's not choppy in both.
I'm pretty sure it's impossible, but we'll see. The community's take question is simple one. For the next generation of consoles, what is the one defining feature or thing that you want to see? Is it the improved visuals that everyone else wants to see? Is it frame rate and general game performance? Is it something like resolution, where it's less about detail, more about blowing that resolution up? Or is it more something on the whims of it, where you want to see what they'll do with motion controls like everybody else is excited for? Let us know. You can, of course, always, if you're watching on YouTube, comment that down in the video below. If you're listening on podcast services, specifically Podbean, you can always comment in response to the episode. We'll check that out. If you're listening to us on iTunes, consider giving us a review. Let people know what you did like about the show and let them know what you didn't, so that we can see that as well and determine what we want to do based off what you did and didn't like. And of course, it just lets other people see if you think that we are worth their time, and we appreciate it when you let people do that. And of course, I will go to social media and post this on Wednesday, as we normally do midway through the week. Let some people listen to our thoughts on it and then kind of say your own. And of course, I'm going to start ending almost every episode with this. If you like what we're doing here and you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe. If you're on podcast services, subscribe to us. You can listen to us every week normally. We finally missed one recently, of course, last week. But the other thing I want to do is I want to see new blood, new faces, talk to new people. I really want to see us grow. So I urge you, anybody that you think may like the show, suggest us to them. If nothing else, just share us on your social media if you have one. You may not realize that one of your friends would be interested. They may click on it and listen. And I like, my favorite part of doing this show, outside of just getting to sit here and have a good time with one of my best friends, is being able to kind of talk to people. And I love the people that we get to talk to right now. But it's always fun when you get somebody else new and you kind of get a different perspective in. And I feel like we see that a lot. One of the community sake from last week that didn't end up going. I just didn't really want to retread it. There were some really interesting answers, and a lot of that came from people who are a little bit newer into the fold, and I like seeing those. So either way, we appreciate you guys for being sticking with us, even though we had a little weird week of stuff. But we will see you next time, and definitely we appreciate you so much. And now is the time where we thank our patrons.
Yes.
So y'all have a good week.
You too.
Thanks to our patrons, Dan Barber, Josh Jarrell, Matthew Green. My name is Dan. Douglas Below, Sean Santarude, Eric McAllister, Matt Sycamore, Funk Turkey, Danny Villalobos, Shadowist, Steven Salazar, The Stonard, Travis Below, Eduardo Palomino, Stefan Swanland, Coy Live, Philip LaGuerre, Corey Hickerson, Solitary Red, Brian, Donovan Williams, William Digital Spooker, Derek Porter, Josh Ayers, Brandon Edwards, Sean One Neo, Tyler Powers, Dylan Kirby, and Sandcoffin. If you would like to support the show, head over to patreon.com/Nartech and see what we've got going on. Thank you.